There is a place in the middle of Australia that does not make sense. It rises from a perfectly flat desert like a mistake, like something that should not exist. The land around it is red and dry and ancient, stretching in every direction without interruption, without variation, without a single feature that might prepare you for what comes next. And then, without warning, without preamble, without any geological transition that satisfies the rational mind, it simply appears. A monolith, a mountain that forgot to bring its mountain range, a singular mass of sandstone the color of dried blood, sitting alone on the desert floor as though it dropped from somewhere above. Scientists call it an Inselberg, an island mountain, a remnant of erosion so extreme and so prolonged that everything around it simply ceased to exist, leaving this one formation standing while the world wore itself down to flatness all around it. That is the accepted explanation. That is what the textbooks say. That is what the tour guides repeat to visitors who arrive at dawn to watch the rock change color in the morning light, shifting from charcoal to violet to orange to a red so deep and vivid it looks like something alive. But the Anangu people, the traditional custodians of this land, the people whose ancestors have lived in relationship with this place for at least 60,000 years, they have a different understanding, not a competing theory, not a myth in the dismissive way that word is sometimes used. An understanding that carries within it the memory of a world so ancient that the human mind can barely hold its edges. They call it Uluru, and they say it remembers. Tonight, we are going to sit with that remembering. We are going to move slowly through 20 reasons why Uluru is not simply what it appears to be. 20 windows into a place that has been called the most sacred site on Earth. 20 invitations to consider that the land itself might be a kind of library, and that the rock at the center of Australia might be one of its oldest and most important volumes. Before we begin, if this kind of slow, careful exploration of ancient places and forgotten knowledge is something you want more of in your life, consider subscribing. We make content for people who like to think slowly, for people who find that the most interesting questions are the ones that stay open, for people who understand that a story told carefully is worth more than 100 stories told fast. Now, let us begin at the beginning, or as close to the beginning as we can get. Number 1. The rock that goes deeper than you think. When most people look at Uluru, they see what rises above the surface. And what rises above the surface is already extraordinary enough. Uluru stands 348 meters above the surrounding plain. Its circumference at the base is 9.4 kilometers. On a clear day, you can see it from 50 kilometers away, which in the flat emptiness of the Australian outback means you can see it from the edge of the horizon itself, this dark shape rising against a sky that seems too large to contain anything at all. But what you see above ground is not most of Uluru. Geologists who have studied the formation estimate that the rock extends somewhere between 2.5 and 6 kilometers below the surface of the desert. The figure varies depending on the study and the method of measurement, but every estimate agrees on one thing. What you see is a fraction, the top of something vastly larger, a tip, a summit, the uppermost point of a formation so enormous that the mind struggles to construct it. Think about what that means for a moment. The part of Uluru that has become one of the most photographed landmarks on Earth, the part that draws 500,000 visitors every year, the part that turns those impossible colors at sunrise and sunset, is perhaps 5% of the whole, perhaps less. The rest is underground, embedded in the earth, connected to the geological history of a continent so old, it makes the Alps and the Himalayas look like recent renovations. The Anangu understand this intuitively, not through seismic surveys, but through something older. They speak of Uluru as a living entity that extends into the earth as well as above it. They do not separate the visible from the invisible. They do not treat the part you can see as the important part and everything else as background. For them, the whole is sacred. The whole is connected. The whole is alive in ways that geology alone cannot fully describe. What the geologists have confirmed in their own language is that Uluru is a piece of the ancient seafloor. It formed approximately 550 million years ago, during a period when the region that is now Central Australia was covered by a shallow inland sea. Sediments accumulated, pressure accumulated, time accumulated. The sediments compressed into arkose, a form of sandstone rich in feldspar, and then the sea retreated and the land lifted, and the forces that shaped continents over hundreds of millions of years went to work on everything that had been deposited. Everything around Uluru eroded. Over hundreds of millions of years, the surrounding land simply wore away. The softer rock surrendered to wind and water in time, but Uluru, for reasons that are still not entirely understood, did not surrender. It remained. It outlasted everything around it. It is still here, while the world that once surrounded it is gone. The Anangu say that some things are simply meant to remain. Number 2, the colors are not what you think they are. The color of Uluru is one of the things that visitors most remember. It is the red, that specific particular red that seems to glow from within the rock itself, especially in the early morning and late afternoon light. Photographs of it circulate endlessly. It has become one of the visual signatures of Australia. This red rock against the blue sky, this burning stone in the center of a continent. But Uluru is not actually red, or rather, the rock itself, the Arcos sandstone beneath the surface, is grey, a dull, unremarkable grey. The colour you see is rust, literally. The surface of Uluru is coated in a thin layer of iron oxide, which is the same compound that forms on exposed iron when it comes into contact with oxygen and moisture. The red of Uluru is the rock oxidizing over millions of years, the iron in the feldspar-rich sandstone reacting with the environment, developing a patina that has been accumulating since before any human being walked the continent. When you climb down into the caves and overhangs at the base of Uluru, the rock loses its red. It becomes that grey again, the protected surface that has never been fully exposed, the inner material of the formation. The red is only the outermost layer, a skin, an interface between the rock and the atmosphere. But this is where it gets interesting. The colour of Uluru is not static. It changes throughout the day in ways that feel almost impossible for a rock. In the hour before sunrise, Uluru is nearly black, a dark mass against the pre-dawn sky. As the sun begins to rise, the rock lightens through a deep purple, then through violet, then into the warm oranges, and finally into that red that burns so intensely in the mid-morning light that it seems incandescent. As the sun moves through the sky, the colour shifts continuously. By afternoon, it is a different red, softer, more muted. At sunset, the process reverses and intensifies, and Uluru burns again, more dramatically than in the morning, a last performance before the desert goes dark. Photographers have spent entire careers trying to capture this. Painters have stood at its base and wept at their own inadequacy. The colour is responsive in a way that feels organic rather than mineral, as though the rock is aware of the light and is responding to it. The Anangu do not separate the rock from what the rock does. The colour changes, the shadow movements, the way water moves across the surface after rain, the sounds the rock makes when it cools at night, all of these are part of Uluru's presence, not incidental features of a geological formation, but expressions of something they call Chukurpa, which is the word we will return to again and again tonight, because it is the key to understanding everything else. Chukurpa is sometimes translated as dreamtime, but this translation is inadequate in the way that most translations of profound concepts are inadequate. Chukurpa encompasses the laws of the universe, the moral framework of Anangu society, the stories of how the world was made, the instructions for how to live in relationship with the land, and the ongoing reality of creation. It is not something that happened in the past and is now finished. It is not a historical period. It is a dimension of reality that exists alongside and beneath the visible world, continuously generating the world we experience. When Anangu elders say that Uluru was created during the Chukurpa, they do not mean what happened a long time ago. They mean that Uluru exists within an ongoing creative act, that its formation is not complete, that the story is still being told. Number 3. The caves that are not empty. At the base of Uluru, there are caves. Dozens of them. Indentations in the rock face that range from shallow shelters barely deep enough to stand into larger spaces, that feel genuinely interior, that feel like rooms. Many of them face north or east, positioned to catch the warmth of the morning sun. Many of them have water stains on their walls from the runoff that flows down the face of Uluru after rain. Many of them have art. The art at the base of Uluru is one of the great concentrations of ancient rock art in the world. Ochre paintings in red and yellow and white, engraved lines in the stone itself, symbols and patterns that repeat across different panels with a consistency that suggests not random mark-making, but a visual language being used systematically. Much of this art is not publicly accessible. The Anangu have requested, and the park management has respected, that certain areas be closed to visitors. Not because the art is fragile, though it is, but because the stories embedded in the art are sacred and are not meant to be seen by everyone. In Anangu law, some knowledge is secret. Some knowledge is for initiated people only. Some knowledge is gender-specific. Some is clan-specific. Some is only for those who have been through the proper ceremonial processes that prepare a person to receive it. This is a concept that most modern Western societies have largely abandoned. The idea that not all information should be freely available to everyone. The idea that some knowledge changes you in ways you need to be prepared for. The idea that a story told to the wrong person at the wrong time is not just wasted, but can be actively harmful. The art in the accessible caves at Uluru tells stories that the Anangu are willing to share with visitors. Stories about Chukurpa figures who moved across this landscape during the creation period. Stories about the features of the rock itself, why this particular wall has that particular shape, why this cave exists where it does, why water flows in this direction after rain. Every physical feature of Uluru is narratively explained. Every bump and hollow and crack has a story. The rock is not a passive geological formation, it is a palimpsest, a surface onto which meaning has been written over and over for 60,000 years. The oldest of the art at Uluru has not been definitively dated. Okeron rock is difficult to date with precision using current methods, but comparable art in other parts of Australia has been dated to more than 50,000 years ago, and many archaeologists believe that the tradition of rock art at sacred sites like Uluru extends back to the earliest period of human habitation on the continent, 60,000 years. Think about what that means. The oldest buildings in the world are perhaps 10,000 years old. Writing was invented 5,000 years ago. The religions that most of humanity follows are 2,000 to 3,000 years old. Uluru has been a sacred site for 3 times longer than the oldest religion, 6 times longer than the oldest written language. It has been a site of ceremony and story and art since before the last ice age ended, since before the megafauna of Australia went extinct, since before the sea levels rose to create the coastline that exists today. The caves at the base are not empty. They are full of time, full of story, full of a relationship between human beings and a specific piece of the earth that is so old it makes most of human history look recent. Number 4. The water that should not be there. Uluru sits in the Tanami Desert, which is one of the driest places in Australia, which is one of the driest continents on Earth. The average annual rainfall at Uluru is around 300 millimeters. Much of that evaporates immediately. The landscape around the rock is spinifex grass and desert oaks and red earth, an ecology shaped by scarcity, by the absence of water. And yet, Uluru has waterholes, permanent waterholes, or near permanent, in the sense that they hold water for longer than any hydrological calculation would predict, given the rainfall and the evaporation rate and the permeability of the surrounding substrate. The shape of Uluru acts as a massive catchment system. Water that falls anywhere on the 9 square kilometers of the rock's surface is channeled by the curves and grooves and furrows of the formation towards specific collection points. The waterholes at the base of Uluru are the endpoints of these channels, and they collect and hold water in volumes disproportionate to the rainfall. The rock concentrates water, it is a machine for gathering moisture and directing it to specific places. The Anangu have known this for 60,000 years. The waterholes at Uluru are marked in their knowledge as places of life, places where the land provides what seems impossible, places where the desert relents. The waterholes support a specific ecology. Mosses and ferns that exist nowhere else in the surrounding desert grow in the spray zone of the rock face near the waterholes. Animals that require water live in close proximity to Uluru in ways that would not be possible in the surrounding landscape. One of the waterholes, Mutitjulu Waterhole on the southern side of the rock, is connected in Chukurpa to a story about 2 ancestral beings who fought at Uluru during the creation period. The marks of their battle are visible in the rock face above the waterhole, formations that the Anangu identify as evidence of the struggle, and the waterhole itself was created by their conflict. The water that collects there is sacred. It is not simply a resource. It is the remnant of a story, the physical trace of an event in the Chukurpa that continues to generate water in a place where water should not be. When scientists study the hydrology of Uluru, they find a system that is unusually efficient, unusually productive for its environment. The rock does concentrate water in ways that are measurably significant. The science confirms the function. It does not explain why the function seems calibrated, intentional, as though the rock was designed for this purpose. The Anangu would not use the word designed. They would say that Uluru was made this way during the Chukurpa, that its shape is the result of creation, not accident, and that the water it provides is one of the expressions of its ongoing relationship with the living world. Number 5, the sounds that the rock makes. Visitors who spend time at Uluru at night, particularly in the period after midnight when the desert has fully cooled, report hearing sounds from the rock, creaking, clicking, a low groaning that seems to come from deep within the formation. These are not imaginary. They are documented by sound engineers and geologists who have studied the acoustic properties of large rock formations. What is happening is thermal contraction. During the day, the surface of Uluru heats to temperatures that can exceed 70 degrees Celsius. The rock expands microscopically as it heats. At night, as the desert air cools rapidly, sometimes dropping more than 20 degrees in a few hours, the rock contracts. The contraction of 9.5 cubic kilometers of sandstone creates enormous internal stresses, and those stresses releases sounds. The rock is speaking its temperature. It is expressing the transition from day to night in the only language available to stone, but the sounds are striking to anyone who hears them in the desert silence. In the surrounding landscape, the night is nearly completely quiet. The spinifex moves without sound. The stars are extraordinarily bright in the absence of any artificial light. The air smells of earth and cold and something that is very difficult to name. And into that silence, the rock groans. Aboriginal people across Australia have known for tens of thousands of years that stone is not silent. The idea that only living things make sounds, that only organic entities are expressive in this way, is a relatively recent Western assumption. Many indigenous traditions around the world understand the land itself as communicative, as expressive, as sending signals that those who know how to listen can receive. The Anangu relationship with the sounds of Uluru is part of a larger relationship with the acoustic environment of the landscape. They recognize sounds as information. The sound of wind through specific rock formations, the sound of water moving through certain channels after rain, the sound of the rock itself at night. All of these are part of an environmental text that is continuously being read by those who have learned how. Visitors who sit quietly at the base of Uluru at night and simply listen often describe the experience as one of the most powerful of their lives. Not because they understand what they are hearing, but because the sound is so clearly not nothing. The rock is not silent. The rock is doing something that it has been doing for 500 million years, announcing its temperature to the empty desert, speaking its contraction into the cold air. Number 6, the route of the creation ancestors. Central Australia is crossed by a network of paths called songlines by some researchers, though the Aboriginal languages have their own terms for them in each region. These are routes travelled by ancestral beings during the Tjukurpa, the creation period, and they connect sacred sites across vast distances. They are navigation systems, spiritual highways, networks of connection between places that are individually meaningful and collectively part of a larger design. Uluru sits at the intersection of several major songlines. It is not an isolated sacred site. It is a junction, a place where multiple ancestral routes converge, where multiple creation stories share their geography, where the Tjukurpa paths of different ancestral beings meet and cross, and sometimes tangle together. The songlines that pass through Uluru extend in different directions across the continent. Some travel north toward what is now the Kimberley region. Some travel south toward the coast. Some travel east and west. They connect Uluru to dozens of other significant sites, creating a network that covers most of the Australian continent, a web of sacred geography that has been maintained through ceremony and song and story for at least 60,000 years. The name Songline refers to the fact that the roots of the ancestral beings were encoded in songs. To sing the correct song while traveling across the country was to navigate that country, because the song described the landmarks in sequence. The features of the landscape were verses in the song, and the song was the map. If you knew the song, you could travel safely across country you had never physically visited, because the song would tell you where to find water, where to find shelter, where to rest, where to be careful. Bruce Chatwin wrote about this system in his 1987 book, and his description brought it to the attention of many Western readers. But Chatwin's description, brilliant as it was, necessarily simplified something that is profoundly complex. The songline system is not just a navigation aid. It is a total description of reality, a complete account of the relationship between human beings and the land they live within, encoded in musical form and maintained through oral tradition over an inconceivable span of time. Uluru's position at the junction of multiple songlines means that it is not just locally significant, it is cosmologically central. It is a place that matters to people across a vast territory, that is connected through story and song to sites hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers away, that participates in a continental scale network of meaning. The traditional custodians of Uluru, the Anangu, are the most proximate of many groups for whom the site has importance. But there are other groups who have ancestral connections to sites that the songlines connect to Uluru, who therefore have a relationship with Uluru itself, even if they live in different regions. The rock is not owned in the possessive Western sense. It is shared within a complex system of custodianship and responsibility that has no clean translation into English legal concepts. Number 7. The story of Lunkata, the blue-tongued lizard man. The southern face of Uluru holds one of the most clearly visible of the Tjukurpa stories, the narrative of Lunkata, an ancestral being who travelled to Uluru during the creation period, and whose transgression against the laws of sharing is recorded in the rock face itself. The story, as shared by Anangu elders with researchers and visitors, goes roughly like this. Lunkata was a blue-tongued lizard man, one of the ancestral beings who moved through the landscape during the Tjukurpa. He came to the area around Uluru and found a dying emu that had already been wounded by other hunters. By the laws of Anangu society, which are the laws established during the Tjukurpa, and therefore not negotiable, a hunter who finds an animal already brought down by others is obligated to share the meat with those hunters. The animal does not belong to the finder. The work of the original hunters must be acknowledged. Lunkata did not share. He concealed the emu and ate it by himself, violating one of the fundamental laws of the Anangu world. The consequences of this violation are visible in the rock. Specific formations on the southern face of Uluru are identified as the remains of Lunkata's fire, his camp, the bones of the emu. The dark streaks that run down the rock face in certain areas are said to be the smoke of Lunkata's selfish fire. What makes this story remarkable is not that it is a moral teaching encoded in landscape, though it is that. What is remarkable is its specificity. It is not a general teaching about the importance of sharing. It is a specific narrative about a specific being who did a specific thing at this specific place. And the consequences of that act are physically present in the landscape, readable by anyone with the knowledge to read them. This is what the Anangu mean when they say that the land tells stories. not metaphorically, not poetically. The land is a text, and those who have been taught the language can read it. The stone is an archive of events that happened before human memory, and those events are encoded in the physical features of the rock. The moral dimension of this is profound. Uluru is not just a beautiful geological formation. It is a place where the consequences of transgression are visible and permanent. It is a reminder, set in stone on a scale that cannot be ignored, of what happens when the laws that hold the community together are broken. The rock is a law book, a court record, a monument to the importance of living within the obligations that make human society possible. Number 8, the animals that are not supposed to be there. The immediate environment of Uluru supports a density and diversity of animal life that is disproportionate to what the surrounding desert should be able to sustain. Near the waterholes, there are species that require moisture. In the caves and overhangs, there are species that require shelter from the extreme temperatures of the desert. In the spinifex around the base, there are species that find food and protection in a specific ecological niche, created by the intersection of the rock with the surrounding habitat. Researchers who have catalogued the fauna of Uluru Kata Tjuta National Park have found it to be a genuine refuge, an island of biological richness in a sea of comparative scarcity. There are species of lizard found at Uluru that do not exist in the surrounding habitat. There are bird species that breed on or near the rock and then disperse across the desert, using Uluru as their home base. There are insects, particularly cave-dwelling species, that are found only in the specific microenvironments created by the rock's overhangs and sheltered faces. The Anangu relationship with these animals is not separate from their relationship with Uluru. The animals are part of the same Chukerpa network. Many of the creation ancestors were animals, or had animal forms, or were connected to specific species. The blue-tongued lizard of Lunkata's story is not incidental. It is meaningful that this particular ancestral being had this particular animal identity. The animal species of Uluru are not background. They are participants in the same story. There is a specific group of animals at Uluru that have particularly important roles in Anangu Chukerpa. The mala, which is a type of wallaby, features in one of the central stories of the site. The ancestral mala came to Uluru during the creation period, and their activities shaped specific features of the rock. Today, the mala is extinct at Uluru in the wild, lost to the same combination of feral predators and change fire ecology that has devastated so many Australian native species over the past 2 centuries. But a captive breeding and reintroduction program is underway, and there is the possibility that the mala will return. For the Anangu, the return of the mala to Uluru is not just a conservation outcome. It is a restoration of something sacred, a healing of a relationship between place and species that was damaged through no fault of either party. The rock without the mala is incomplete. The story cannot be told the way it should be told without the animal that belongs there. Number 9, the rain and what it reveals. Uluru does not receive a great deal of rain. When rain comes to the central desert, it often comes suddenly and dramatically. The kind of downpour that can drop 50 millimeters of water in a few hours, flooding washes that are dry for months at a time and raising the level of the few permanent waterholes dramatically before everything soaks into the red earth or evaporates in the fierce heat that follows. What rain does to Uluru is extraordinary. The rock transforms. Its surface, ordinarily matte and dusty and uniformly red in its outer layer, becomes something else entirely when it is wet. The red deepens to almost black in places. The grey of the inner stone shows through where the water has cleaned the surface. Streams appear on the rock face, white water cascading down channels that run along lines of weakness in the sandstone, channels that have been carved over millions of years of exactly this process. The rock becomes a waterfall system, dozens of individual falls running down its flanks, meeting at the base in foaming temporary pools, and the rock, when wet, reflects the sky. In areas where water sheets across relatively flat surfaces, the rock becomes a mirror, showing the clouds above, showing the rare side of an Uluru surrounded by storm. The color, the water, the reflections, the sound of the falls, all of it together creates an experience of Uluru in the rain that visitors who have witnessed it consistently describe as one of the most affecting experiences of their lives. The Anangu do not see the rain as a weather event that happens to coincide with their sacred site. The rain is part of the site. The way water moves on Uluru, the channels it takes, the waterfalls it creates, the pools it leaves, all of these are part of the Chukerpa. Specific waterfalls on Uluru are named. They are connected to specific ancestral stories. The path that water takes down the rock face is not random erosion. It is the trace of creation, the route that ancestral action carved into the stone. In a dry continent where water is the most precious resource, a rock that gathers and channels and stores water is a gift of almost incomprehensible value. The Anangu have understood this for 60,000 years. The gratitude they feel toward Uluru is not abstract or philosophical. It is the gratitude of people who know that this rock has kept their ancestors alive in the driest heart of a dry continent by being what it is. Number 10, the light at the end of the day. There is a specific phenomenon that occurs at Uluru in the period immediately after sunset that has no easy geological explanation. The surrounding desert goes dark quickly after the sun drops below the horizon. The sky loses its color rapidly, the light fades, but Uluru continues to glow, not with a supernatural light, not with anything that a physicist could not explain using the properties of rock and light. But the timing is strange. The rock seems to hold the sunlight after the sun has gone. It seems to be releasing slowly the warmth and light it has absorbed through the day. For a period of 15 to 20 minutes after sunset, Uluru is the brightest object in the landscape, glowing a red so deep it is almost maroon, while everything around it has already surrendered to the dark. Photographers who have studied this phenomenon talk about the way the rock seems to be lit from within during this period. The effect is partially explained by the physics of thermal radiation, the rock releasing heat as infrared light, but the visual effect is of something more than physics. In the desert dusk, Uluru looks alive in a way that is difficult to dismiss as metaphor. The Anangu understand this as part of Uluru's nature. The rock is not diminishing at the end of the day, it is full. It has spent the day absorbing what the sun has given it, and now it is sharing that accumulated energy with the darkening desert. It is expressing something it has been holding. The light at the end of the day is not a last gasp, it is a gift. For visitors who have made the journey to Uluru specifically to see the sunset colors, and there are many thousands of them each year, this post-sunset glow is often the most memorable moment. Not the famous colors of the sunset itself, which are magnificent but expected, but the aftermath. The way the rock keeps going when everything else has stopped, the way it stays warm and red and present in the darkness that is already claiming the surrounding world. Number 11, the forbidden climb. For decades, visitors to Uluru were permitted and encouraged to climb it. A chain was bolted into the rock face on the northwestern side, a guide rope for tourists making the ascent to the summit. At the peak of this practice, thousands of people climbed Uluru every year. It was marketed as one of the great Australian experiences, something you did when you visited the centre of the continent, a physical achievement to carry home in photographs. The Anangu asked people not to climb from the earliest days of tourism. Not demanded, not forbade, not enforced with any mechanism of compulsion. Asked. The climb crosses a path used only by Anangu men for specific sacred ceremonies. The chain was bolted into the rock without consultation, into a feature of the landscape that had a ceremonial meaning that was not explained to the people doing the work. The presence of tourists on the rock, on this particular route, on this particular face, was a violation of something the Anangu did not have adequate English words to explain, and the authorities of the time did not have adequate cultural knowledge to understand what was being asked of them. The asking went on for decades. The Anangu continued to request, politely, repeatedly, consistently. They explained to the extent that their sacred knowledge could be explained to outsiders. They produced signs, information boards, multilingual materials, all saying the same thing. This place is sacred. We ask you not to climb, not for safety reasons, though people fell from the rock and died, not for environmental reasons, though the climb route was visibly damaged by the traffic of millions of feet, but because of what the rock is, because of what climbing it means in the framework of Chukopa. In October 2019, the climb was permanently closed. The chain was removed. The closure was the fulfillment of a promise made in the original handback agreement when the land was returned to the Anangu in 1985, that when the proportion of visitors who chose not to climb reached a sufficient level, the climb would be closed. The response to the closure was divided. Many people were angry. They felt that a right had been taken from them, that a tourist experience they had planned or hoped for was no longer available. They wrote letters, they made social media posts. They described the closure as political, as an imposition, as unnecessary. The Anangu received the closure with quiet dignity. One elder, when asked how she felt, said simply that she was happy, that they had been asking for a long time, and now the answer had finally been yes. What this episode reveals about Uluru is something important. The rock has a quality that makes people want to climb it, not just because it is there, in the Mallory sense, but because it draws people toward itself in a way that is difficult to resist. The impulse to ascend, to be on top of this thing, to possess it visually from above, is very strong in visitors who have no cultural framework for understanding why the impulse should be resisted. The Anangu framework does not celebrate the conquest of landscape. It celebrates relationship with landscape. The difference between these two approaches to the natural world is not academic. It is the difference between treating the land as a resource and treating it as a relative. Number 12. The age that reframes everything. 60,000 years of human presence at Uluru. This is the conservative estimate. Many archaeologists believe the figure is higher. The oldest definitive evidence of human habitation in Australia has been dated to at least 65,000 years ago, and there are sites with evidence of human presence that may be older. The peopling of Australia is the oldest continuous culture on Earth, and Uluru has been part of that culture since near the beginning. To sit with the number 60,000 for a moment, modern humans left Africa approximately 70,000 years ago. The first people to reach Australia came by sea at least 65,000 years ago, making a crossing of open water that was unprecedented in human history at that time. They arrived on a continent they had never seen, that no human had ever seen, and they began to learn it. They learned Uluru. They sat at its base and felt its warmth and drank from its waterholes and found shelter in its caves. They watched it change color at sunrise and heard it groan at night and felt the way rain ran off its surface and collected in the hollows. Over generations, over centuries, over millennia, they accumulated knowledge of this place. They encoded that knowledge in stories. They passed those stories down, generation to generation, through an oral tradition so robust and so carefully maintained that the knowledge is still accessible today. Think about what has changed in 60,000 years. The Ice Age came and went, the megafauna of Australia went extinct. Sea levels rose and fell and rose again. Civilizations rose and collapsed on the other side of the world. Languages were born and died. The continent of Australia was mapped and named and claimed and colonized and partially decolonized. Everything changed. The Anangu relationship with Uluru did not change. The stories continued. The knowledge was maintained. This is not primitive. This is not static. This is an achievement of cultural continuity so extraordinary that it has no parallel in human history. The Egyptian pyramids are 4,500 years old, and we consider them ancient. The Anangu knowledge of Uluru is 15 times older than the pyramids, and it is living knowledge held by living people, expressed in living ceremony and story. When scientists come to Uluru to study its geology, its hydrology, its ecology, its acoustic properties, they are newcomers. They have been there for 50 years. The Anangu have been there for 60,000. The question of who has the deeper knowledge of this place is not rhetorical. Number 13, the naming that matters. The rock has had several names in the non-Aboriginal world. The explorer Ernest Giles named the nearby dome formation Kata Tjuta in the European record, but the large monolith he did not see. It was William Gosser who first described Uluru in the written record of European exploration in 1873, and he named it Ayers Rock, after Henry Ayers, the Chief Secretary of South Australia at the time. The name Ayers Rock was used for over a century. It appeared on maps, in guidebooks, in tourist materials, in news reports. It was the name that most of the world knew. When the land was returned to the Anangu in 1985, the official name reverted to Uluru, and since 2002, the dual name Uluru Ayers Rock has been the official designation, though in common usage, Uluru has become the standard. The Anangu name is not simply a label. In the Anangu tradition, names are not arbitrary, they are functional. A name carries information. A name connects the named thing to its story, to its place in the Chukopa, to its relationships with other named things. The name Uluru does not translate directly, and the Anangu are not always comfortable with attempts to translate it, because the translation reduces something complex to something simple. What can be said is that the name is very old. It may be one of the oldest place names still in active use anywhere on Earth. It has been spoken by human mouths for tens of thousands of years, carrying across that time the accumulated relationship between a people and a place. The naming argument is sometimes dismissed as political, as though the choice between Uluru and Ayers Rock is merely a matter of cultural sensitivity or political correctness. But names matter in ways that go deeper than politics. A place named after a British colonial administrator has a different relationship to the land than a place named in the language of the people who have known that land for 60,000 years. The name is the beginning of the story, and the story you begin with shapes everything that follows. Number 14. The geology that surprises geologists. Uluru and Kata Tjuta, the nearby collection of dome formations, are related but different in ways that geologists find genuinely interesting. Both are remnants of ancient rock that survived the erosion that consumed everything around them. Both are composed of ancient sedimentary material that was compressed under enormous pressure and then tilted by tectonic forces. But the tilting is where the interesting difference appears. The layers of rock in Uluru are nearly vertical. They run at approximately 85 degrees to the horizontal, which means they are almost standing on end. The sandstone that makes up Uluru was originally deposited horizontally, as sediment always is, but the tectonic forces that acted on this region over hundreds of millions of years tilted the layers nearly upright. Uluru is a book that has been stood on its spine. The implications of this are visible in the surface texture of the rock. The horizontal grooves that run across the face of Uluru, the lines that create its distinctive layered appearance, are not horizontal at all in terms of the original sediment deposition. They are the edges of vertical strata, the ends of layers that run deep into the earth, visible at the surface because the layers are oriented vertically rather than horizontally. This tilting is also responsible for the way water moves on Uluru. The grooves that channel water down the face of the rock are not random. They follow the weaknesses between strata, and because the strata are vertical, the channels run in the direction determined by the original orientation of the sediment. The rain that falls on Uluru is sorted and directed by a pattern set 500 million years ago, when the layers were deposited on the floor of a shallow sea. The geologists who study Uluru find it consistently surprising, not because its geology is mysterious in a way that cannot eventually be explained, but because the explanations keep revealing layers of complexity that were not initially apparent. The more closely it is studied, the more interesting it becomes. This is true of most things that deserve close attention. Number 15, the ceremonies that continue. Uluru is an active ceremonial site. This is not something that happened in the past and is now complete. Ceremonies are performed at Uluru and in its immediate surroundings on a regular basis. The Anangu, who are the custodians of this knowledge, continue to maintain their responsibilities to the site through ceremony, through the recitation of stories, through the passing of knowledge to the next generation, through the physical maintenance of certain features of the site. Some of these ceremonies are performed in areas closed to tourists. The National Park Management works to accommodate ceremonial activity, which sometimes means temporarily closing sections of the accessible areas when ceremonies require that visitors not be present. This is not an unusual accommodation. It is the basic respect due to a living religious tradition that predates every other active religion on Earth by tens of thousands of years. What most visitors do not realize is that their presence at Uluru is, in a sense, permitted. The Anangu have not given up their relationship with the site. They have chosen, within the framework of a changed political and social reality, to allow visitors under certain conditions and in certain areas. This is their generosity, not their defeat. The ceremonies that continue at Uluru encode knowledge about the landscape, about ecology, about history, about the maintenance of right relationship between human beings and the land they live within. They are functional as well as spiritual, which is a distinction that Anangu thought does not make, in the same way that Western thought tends to. A ceremony that maintains right relationship with the land is both a spiritual act and a practical act. The land requires attention. The attention takes the form of ceremony. The ceremony is the maintenance. Number 16. The stars above. The skies above Central Australia are among the darkest in the world. The nearest significant source of artificial light is Alice Springs, more than 400 kilometers away, and the effect of that light on the night sky at Uluru is negligible. The Milky Way rises above Uluru on clear nights with a density and brightness that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has only ever seen it through light-polluted skies. The Anangu have been reading the night sky from the base of Uluru for 60,000 years. Their astronomical knowledge is embedded in the Chukopa and is sophisticated in ways that Western science is only beginning to appreciate. The Anangu and other Aboriginal Australians developed one of the most advanced observational astronomical systems in the ancient world. One of the distinctive features of Anangu astronomy is attention to what is not there. While most cultures with ancient astronomical traditions focused on the bright stars and planets, the Anangu developed a system of dark constellation astronomy, in which the dark patches within the Milky Way, the areas where interstellar dust obscures the stars behind, were identified as the silhouettes of animals. The emu in the sky is a dark constellation, defined by the shape of the dark nebula that crosses the Milky Way, in a form that, with appropriate orientation and knowledge, resembles an emu. The appearance of this dark emu in the sky corresponds to the time when emus are sitting on their eggs, which is the time when emu eggs can be collected for food. The astronomy is ecological, the sky is a calendar, and the calendar is calibrated to the specific ecology of the Australian continent. The knowledge is precise, practical, and beautiful. From Uluru, the dark emu rises. From Uluru, the stars that the Anangu have named and tracked and used as seasonal guides have been rising for as long as there have been human eyes to watch them. The rock and the sky above it are part of the same knowledge system. The ground and the stars are not separate. They are a single environment, and the Anangu have been learning to read both simultaneously for longer than any other people on Earth. Number 17. The trees of Chukopa. In the Chukopa stories, there are ancestral beings who were trees. There are stories about the relationship between specific trees and specific places, about the way certain species mark the presence of water, or indicate the quality of the soil, or signal the approach of certain seasons. The ecology of the Uluru region is not background in Anangu thought, it is text. The desert oak, which is one of the most distinctive trees of the Uluru landscape, has a Chukopa connection. Its roots go deep in search of water, sometimes penetrating dozens of meters into the earth before they find what they need. In the knowledge of the Anangu, this depth of root is understood as a kind of commitment, as a form of perseverance in a difficult environment, as a model for how to live in a place that does not always give easily. The mulga, another characteristic tree of the region, is a provider. Its seeds are nutritious, its bark can hold water, its wood is hard and useful. The Chukopa stories about mulga trees are stories about generosity, about the way certain things give consistently without diminishing. The spinifex grass that covers the desert floor around Uluru is not a neutral background. It is part of a managed ecosystem that the Anangu maintain through fire for tens of thousands of years. The mosaic burning practices of Aboriginal Australians, in which different patches of country were burned at different times to create a patchwork of habitats at different stages of regeneration, produced the specific ecology of Central Australia. The spinifex landscapes around Uluru are not natural in the sense of being untouched. They are the result of tens of thousands of years of careful ecological management, a management system that was disrupted by colonization, and that ecologists are now trying to partially restore. Number 18. The wound in the landscape. There are places near Uluru where the ground is disturbed, where the pattern of the desert floor, the spinifex and the red earth and the scattered stones is broken by scars. These are places where people dug for ochre, the red and yellow pigments that have been essential to ceremony and body decoration and art for at least 40,000 years. Ochre deposits in Central Australia were trade goods, carried across hundreds of kilometres through exchange networks that connected communities across the continent. The ochre digs near Uluru are ancient. The specific deposits in this region produce red ochre of a quality that was valued far beyond the immediate area. Ochre from this region has been found at archaeological sites many hundreds of kilometres away, carried there through trade routes that were maintained over thousands of years. The use of ochre connects Uluru to a wider network. It is a node in a continental exchange system. The rock and its immediate surroundings were not an isolated sacred site. They were connected to an economy, to a system of exchange and relationship that spanned the continent. Today, the ochre deposits near Uluru are protected. The Anangu continue to use ochre from the region for ceremonial purposes. The connection between the pigment and the ceremony and the place is unbroken. The red of Uluru and the red of the ochre applied to bodies in ceremony are related colours, related materials, related expressions of the same landscape. Number 19. The rain of frogs. In the immediate aftermath of significant rainfall at Uluru, something happens that visitors who witness it find genuinely disorienting. Frogs appear. Not one or two, hundreds, possibly thousands. They come up from the ground, from chambers and tunnels they have dug into the moist earth around the base of the rock, where they have been buried in a state of torpor for weeks, months, sometimes years, waiting for exactly this moment. Water-holding frogs are among the most remarkable survival adaptations in the animal kingdom. When conditions are dry, which at Uluru means most of the time, they burrow into the ground and produce a cocoon of shed skin cells that slows their water loss to nearly zero. They can remain in this state for years, essentially suspended, using almost no energy, waiting. When rain penetrates the soil and reaches them, they emerge within hours, drawn to the surface by the same cues they have been responding to for millions of years. At Uluru after rain, these frogs emerge and immediately begin to call. The sound is extraordinary. In a landscape that is usually quiet enough that you can hear your own heartbeat, hundreds of frogs calling simultaneously creates a sound that carries for kilometers. It is the desert announcing that water has come. It is the landscape expressing its response to what has been received. The Anangu know the frogs. They are part of the ecology of Tjukurpa. In the traditional knowledge, the emergence of the frogs after rain is not just a biological event. It is an expression of the relationship between the land and the water it receives. A celebration in the only form available to animals that have been waiting underground in the dark for months. The frogs call for as long as the water lasts. They reproduce rapidly. The eggs hatch. Tadpoles develop in temporary pools at the base of Uluru, pools that may not have existed for years. The next generation of frogs grows and disperses and digs and buries itself to wait again. The cycle is ancient. The rock presides over it, channeling the water to the pools, creating the conditions for this brief, extraordinary explosion of life. Number 20. What remains when everything else is gone? Uluru has survived everything. It has survived 500 million years of geological transformation. It has survived the ice ages. It has survived the extinction of the megafauna. It has survived drought and flood, and the rise and fall of sea levels that periodically covered and uncovered the continental interior. It has survived colonization, which brought diseases and disruption and violence that came close to ending the culture that had maintained the relationship with the rock for 60,000 years. It has survived being photographed so many times that its image has become familiar everywhere on Earth. It has survived tourism, which brought hundreds of thousands of visitors every year to stand at its base and try to understand what they were looking at. It is still here. The Anangu are still here. The Tjukurpa is still being told. The ceremonies are still being performed. The knowledge that encodes 60,000 years of relationship between a people and a place is still alive, still held in living minds, still being passed to the next generation. When we talk about what Uluru is, we are always talking about two things simultaneously. The geological formation, the Arco sandstone in Selberg that rises 348 meters above the desert floor, that extends perhaps 6 kilometers below it, that is 550 million years old, and has been slowly oxidizing its surface into red for most of that time. And the named and known and storied location that has been at the center of Anangu life and knowledge and ceremony for 60,000 years. These two things are not separate. The geological formation is what makes the place possible. The place is what makes the geological formation meaningful. Without the stone, there is no story. Without the story, the stone is just a rock. Uluru was never just a rock. The title of tonight's exploration makes a claim that is deliberately provocative, that Uluru is the stump of a tree that once touched the sky. This is not geology, this is imagination, but it is the kind of imagination that certain kinds of landscapes provoke. When you stand at the base of something that rises this far above a perfectly flat plain, that has no geological peers within hundreds of kilometers, that seems so singular and so deliberate in its presence, the mind reaches for metaphors. A stump, something left behind when something larger was removed, something whose roots go deeper than its height above ground, something that was once part of a living system so enormous that the mind cannot reconstruct it from the fragment that remains, something that has outlasted everything around it, something that remembers. The Anangu do not need the metaphor, they have something better. They have the Chukupa, which gives Uluru its actual story, a story far stranger and more beautiful and more instructive than anything a metaphor can offer. They have 60,000 years of relationship with this place. Relationship expressed in ceremony and story and song and the careful maintenance of knowledge across more generations than most of us can count. What we can do, sitting here in whatever darkness surrounds us tonight, in whatever quiet we have made for ourselves, is hold this with appropriate wonder. The rock is real, the age is real, the knowledge is real. The people who hold that knowledge are real, and they are still there, still maintaining their relationship with the oldest sacred site on earth. There is something settling about that. In a world that changes very fast, in lives that are often full of urgency and noise and the pressure of the immediate, there is something genuinely calming about a rock that has been in one place for 500 million years, about a relationship between people and place that has been maintained for 60,000 years, about knowledge that has survived everything that has been thrown at it and is still being held and passed on. Uluru is not going anywhere. The Anangu are not going anywhere. The Chukupa continues. And tonight, in whatever way serves you best, you can rest in that continuity, in the knowledge that some things endure, that some knowledge is deep enough to hold, that the land remembers what we forget, and that the oldest stories are often the ones that matter most. The desert is quiet at night, the rock holds its warmth, the stars rise above it, the dark emu turning slowly with the sky, the Milky Way thick and white and indifferent and beautiful. The waterholes are still. The frogs are underground, waiting. The desert oaks put their roots deeper into the earth. And Uluru remains, as it has remained, as it will remain. Let that be the last thing you hold tonight, if you choose to take something with you into sleep. Not a conclusion, not an argument, not a fact to be remembered. Just the image of the rock in the desert dark, holding the warmth of a day now gone, glowing red against a sky full of stars, still and ancient and present. Rest well, but tonight does not have to end there. There is more. There is always more, when the subject is a place this old and this layered. We have touched 20 reasons why Uluru is something beyond what a geological survey can fully describe. Now we go deeper. We slow down further. We let the rock reveal more of itself, the way it does in the long light of late afternoon, gradually, without hurry, with the patience of something that has been here since before patience was a concept. 21. The wind that shapes. The Central Australian desert is not still. The wind moves constantly across the flat red plain, and it has been moving across it for millions of years. Wind is one of the primary sculptural forces in desert landscapes. It carries particles of sand and dust and grit, and those particles strike the surfaces they pass over, and slowly, imperceptibly, over geological timescales they carve. Uluru shows the work of wind. The smooth faces of the rock, polished by millions of years of abrasion, catch the light differently depending on the angle and the time of day. There are faces of Uluru that seem almost glassy in certain light, buffed by wind-carried particles to a smoothness that seems deliberate, as though the rock has been prepared for something. The wind at Uluru is not always gentle. The desert can produce sandstorms of genuine violence, walls of red dust that reduce visibility to near zero and strip exposed surfaces with an efficiency that nothing else matches. The Anangu have words for these storms and knowledge about how to read the signs of their approach, the specific quality of light before a dust storm, the behavior of animals, the feel of the air. This knowledge is survival knowledge. In the open desert, being caught in a major dust storm without shelter is dangerous. Knowing how to read the sky and find protection in time is the kind of knowledge that distinguishes those who survive from those who do not. Uluru provides shelter from the wind. On its leeward side, the force of the wind is dramatically reduced. The caves and overhangs at its base are calm even when the desert beyond is being scoured. This is another of the ways in which the rock is a refuge, a place that moderates the extremes of an extreme environment, that makes survival possible in conditions where survival would otherwise be marginal. The Anangu understanding of wind is ecological. They know which winds bring rain and which bring dust. They know how wind affects hunting because animals respond to wind in consistent ways. They know how wind affects fire, which is the primary land management tool, and how to use that knowledge to direct burns with precision. The wind is not weather in the passive sense of something that happens to you. It is a participant in the life of the land, something to be read and worked with and understood. 22. The shadow as timekeeper. On a clear day at Uluru, the shadow of the rock extends across the desert floor in a pattern that is consistent and predictable and has been observed for 60,000 years. As the sun moves through the sky, the shadow moves. The edge of the shadow passes over specific points on the desert floor at specific times of day. For anyone who knows the pattern, the shadow of Uluru is a clock. The Anangu use the position of the sun, the length and direction of shadows, the behavior of light as it moves across the landscape as temporal markers. This is not primitive. This is sophisticated environmental awareness of a kind that very few people in the modern world retain. The ability to know the time within half an hour, simply by looking at the shadow of a rock on the desert floor, requires years of attention and learning. It requires the accumulation of a detailed internal model of how light behaves in this specific place at this specific latitude across the course of a year. The shadow of Uluru is longer in winter and shorter in summer, as shadows everywhere follow the position of the sun. But the specific way the shadow moves across the desert floor at Uluru, the specific features it illuminates or passes over at different times of year, is particular to this place and has been observed and encoded in knowledge that is transmitted through the generations of Anangu who have lived here. For visitors who are accustomed to checking the time on a phone, the idea of reading time from a shadow seems archaic. But consider what that capability represents. An intimate knowledge of the relationship between the earth and the sun, a deep attention to the behavior of light in a specific place, a temporal framework that is embedded in the landscape itself rather than imposed upon it from outside. The shadow clock of Uluru is not a primitive substitute for a watch. It is a different relationship to time, one that is embedded in place rather than abstracted from it. 23. The silence that is not silence. People who visit Uluru expecting silence are correct that it is quiet. The absence of traffic noise, machinery, crowd sounds, music, the ambient roar of human activity that most of us live within without noticing is striking at Uluru. The quiet is noticeable in the way that darkness is noticeable when you step out of a lit room. Your senses recalibrate. You begin to notice sounds that you cannot hear in ordinary circumstances. The wind in the spinifex has a specific sound, not the sound of wind through trees, which is softer and more variable, but a dry, persistent hissing that rises and falls with the strength of the breeze. The desert oaks make a different sound, a deeper and more complex tone that some people describe as musical. The rock itself, as discussed, clicks and groans at night. During the day, in the heat, there are sounds of expansion, subtle and intermittent, the occasional sharp crack of contracting or expanding stone. Birds in the desert are not uniformly quiet. The zebrafinch is a small bird that lives throughout inland Australia, and it is noisy in the way that small social birds often are, a constant chipping and chirping that creates a background texture of sound wherever there are finches. The budgerigar, in large flocks, creates a sound of its own, a rushing, chattering wave of noise that passes through the landscape and then is gone. The wedge-tailed eagle that circles high above Uluru on most days is silent in the air but makes a specific call on the ground that carries a long distance in the stillness. For the Anangu, this acoustic landscape is as informative as the visual landscape. The sounds of the desert tell you what is there, what is happening, what is coming. A sudden silence from the birds is significant. The specific call of a particular bird in a specific location can tell you about water or food or danger. The sound of wind changing direction is information about weather. The acoustic environment is a continuous source of intelligence about the state of the world, and the Anangu have been learning to read it for 60,000 years. The word silence in this context means the absence of human noise. It does not mean the absence of sound. Uluru is never truly silent. It is simply speaking in languages that most visitors have never been taught to hear. 24. The relationship with Kata Tjuta. 17 kilometers from Uluru, rising from the same flat desert plain, is Kata Tjuta. Where Uluru is a single monolith, Kata Tjuta is a collection of 36 domed rock formations, clustered together in a mass that covers an area of 35 square kilometers. The name means many heads in the Anangu language. The formations range from small domes to massive structures several hundred meters high. The largest, Mount Olga, as it was named by European explorers, rises 546 meters above the plain, higher than Uluru. Kata Tjuta is made of different rock than Uluru. Where Uluru is Arcos sandstone, Kata Tjuta is a conglomerate, a rock type composed of rounded pebbles of many different materials cemented together in a fine-grained matrix. The pebbles in Kata Tjuta come from a variety of source rocks, some of which have been traced to geological formations that no longer exist in the surrounding landscape. They are remnants of ancient mountains, pebbles that were transported by ancient rivers and deposited in an ancient alluvial fan, then buried, compressed, cemented, and slowly exposed by the same erosion that shaped the surrounding desert. The Chukopa relationship between Uluru and Kata Tjuta is complex and largely restricted knowledge. What can be said is that they are connected. They are not two separate sacred sites. They are part of the same landscape of meaning, related to each other in ways that the ancestral stories describe. The space between them is not empty. It is crossed by the same songlines, inhabited by the same ecological communities, shaped by the same forces that shape both formations. When you stand at Uluru and look toward Kata Tjuta on the horizon, you are seeing two survivors of the same ancient geological event, two remnants of the same lost landscape. They have been companions across 500 million years. They have watched the world change around them while remaining, each in its own way, what it has always been. For the Anangu, this companionship is not metaphorical. The relationship between the two sites is real and has specific content in the Chukopa. The ceremonies performed at one are connected to the ceremonies performed at the other. The knowledge held about one is related to the knowledge held about the other. They are part of the same system, the same ongoing creation story, the same landscape of meaning that extends across Central Australia and connects to the wider network of sacred sites through the Songlines. 25. The colour of the soil. The red of the soil around Uluru is the same iron oxide that colours the rock's surface. The desert floor in Central Australia is famously red, a colour so distinctive that it has become part of the visual identity of the continent, the red centre, the red heart. The colour is ancient. It is the accumulated product of millions of years of the same weathering process that is ongoing at the surface of Uluru. Iron-rich minerals in the rock weather to iron oxide. The oxide accumulates in the soil, coating the individual grains of sand and silt with a layer of red. The soil itself is often pale beneath the red coating, the coating being just a few molecules thick on each grain, but collectively creating a colour so saturated it seems almost artificial. The Anangu use the soil and the stone in their art and ceremony. Ochre, the term for the pigments used in traditional art and ceremony, refers to iron oxide in its various colours. Red ochre is hematite, the same compound that gives Uluru its surface colour, and the surrounding soil its red. Yellow ochre is guthite, a different form of iron oxide. White pigment comes from kale and clay. These materials are gathered from specific locations, stored, traded, prepared for ceremonial use. The pigments that go onto the bodies of ceremonial participants and onto the walls of sacred sites are not arbitrary colours. They are materials from the land, applied to human skin or stone as a way of drawing the connection between body and country. When ochre from the Uluru region is applied in ceremony, the land is literally touching the participants. The material of the desert, the iron oxide of the rock and the soil, is transferred to human skin in a gesture that makes the connection between people and place physical, not just conceptual. 26. The stories that cannot be told. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about Uluru, and it is the one that is most difficult for visitors to accept. Most of the knowledge about Uluru cannot be shared with visitors. It is not available in guidebooks or documentaries or museum exhibits. It is not accessible online. It is restricted by Anangu law that is many thousands of years older than any law enacted by any government to those who have been through the appropriate initiatory processes. The Anangu distinguish between public knowledge and restricted knowledge. What is shared with visitors in the cultural centre, in the park signage, in the official interpretive materials, is the portion of knowledge that is appropriate for outsiders to receive. It is genuine. It is accurate. It is not dumbed down or invented, but it is a fraction of the whole. The restricted knowledge is secret, not because it is shameful or because the Anangu want to withhold something from visitors out of resentment or contempt. It is secret because secrecy is part of how knowledge is protected and how its power is maintained. In the Anangu epistemological framework, knowledge that is freely available to everyone loses something essential. The proper transmission of knowledge through the appropriate relationships and processes is what makes that knowledge functional. Information is not the same as knowledge. Information can be shared broadly. Knowledge, in this deeper sense, requires the relationship that transmits it to be meaningful. This is why the interpretive experience of Uluru is inherently incomplete. Not because the Anangu are being unhelpful, but because completion is not available to visitors by the nature of what they are. You can understand that the caves have stories. You cannot know the full content of those stories without being initiated into the knowledge tradition that holds them. You can appreciate that Uluru is sacred. You cannot fully comprehend what that sacredness means without the framework that the Chukopa provides, and that framework cannot be transmitted in an afternoon visit to a cultural centre. The appropriate response to this is not frustration. It is humility. The recognition that some things are not available to you, not because of injustice or exclusion, but because of the specific position you occupy relative to a knowledge system you were not born into, is a genuinely valuable recognition. There is something in the landscape of Uluru that you cannot access. That inaccessibility is not a failure of the system, it is a feature of it. It is the rock's way of remaining, in part, its own. 27. The temperature extremes. The Central Australian desert is one of the most thermally extreme environments on Earth that humans inhabit. Summer days at Uluru regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Winter nights drop below zero. The annual temperature range, the difference between the coldest and hottest temperatures recorded in a given year, can be as much as 50 degrees. This is not an environment that makes life easy. It is an environment that demands adaptation of the most fundamental kind. The Anangu are adapted to this environment in ways that go beyond biology. Their knowledge systems carry the accumulated learning of 60,000 years of surviving in these conditions. They know which plants provide food in which seasons. They know where to find shade and how to conserve body heat. They know the behavior of the country in different seasons, which is not abstract knowledge but practical information about how to be alive here. The desert strategies for managing temperature are elegantly simple and deeply effective. Move during the cool hours, rest during the heat, use shade strategically. Know the location of every water source within a practical range. The Anangu were not primitive people struggling against a hostile environment. They were sophisticated people who had learned to live within an environment on its own terms, without fighting it, without trying to change it, without importing the technologies of a different climate, and forcing them to work here. The rock itself is a temperature management tool. Its shaded sides offer relief from direct sun. Its caves are significantly cooler than the open desert during the day and significantly warmer at night because the rock mass stores heat during the day and releases it slowly after dark. The thermal mass of Uluru, 9.5 cubic kilometers of sandstone, creates a microclimate at its base that is more moderate than the surrounding desert. This is not a small thing. In an environment where temperature extremes can kill, a place that moderates those extremes is a place of safety. The caves and overhangs at the base of Uluru have provided refuge from heat and cold for 60,000 years. They are not just ceremonially significant, they are survival infrastructure. 28. The patience of the return. The land at Uluru was returned to the Anangu on October 26, 1985. The ceremony of handback was attended by thousands of people and was one of the most significant events in Australian history, though it received less international attention than it deserved. The moment when the title deed was passed to Anangu elder Nipper Winmardi is recorded in photographs that show a complex mixture of joy and relief and something harder to name. The expression of a people who have been fighting for a very long time and have finally partially won. The handback was partial. The national park remained, managed jointly by the Anangu and the Australian government through Parks Australia. The tourism continued, controlled but extensive. The management of the site was shared, which meant that decisions about how to present and protect Uluru required negotiation between parties who came from very different frameworks of understanding what the place was and what it needed. This negotiation is ongoing. It is not always easy. The interests of tourism and the interests of sacred site maintenance are not always aligned. The expectations of visitors and the requirements of Anangu ceremony are not always compatible. But the framework of joint management has produced some genuinely good outcomes, including the eventual closure of the climb, which the Anangu had sought since the beginning of formal tourism. The patience required to maintain a position for 34 years, from the handback in 1985 to the closure of the climb in 2019, while continuing to ask politely and consistently and in good faith, is a kind of patience that is hard to imagine. It is the patience of a people who know that they are right and who are willing to wait as long as necessary for the rest of the world to understand. It is also, perhaps, the patience of a people who have been waiting for 60,000 years, who know that things take the time they take, and who have a relationship with geological time that makes 34 years seem brief. 29. What the rock teaches. There is a way of learning from landscapes that is older than books, and older than schools, and older than any formalized system of education. It is the learning that comes from sustained attention to a specific place over a long period of time. From watching what the place does in different seasons and different weathers, from following what the animals in the place reveal about its character, from listening to the stories that others have told about the place, stories accumulated over generations, stories that carry observation compressed into narrative form. This is how the Anangu learn, and this is arguably the most reliable way of knowing a place deeply. Uluru teaches specific things to those who give it enough time and attention. It teaches about impermanence, because everything around it has eroded and it has not. And yet it is eroding too, slowly, measurably, surrendering its surface to the atmosphere at a rate of geologically insignificant millimeters per century. It teaches about patience, obviously, in the way that anything 500 million years old teaches patience. It teaches about the relationship between water and stone, about how water shapes and is shaped by what it flows over, about how the hardest things eventually yield to the softest when given enough time. It teaches about persistence, not in the motivational poster sense, in the literal sense. Some things persist, some things remain when everything around them is gone. What makes the difference is not always apparent from outside. Uluru does not look different from the surrounding rock that eroded away. It is made of the same basic material, but it has persisted. Something in its specific structure, its orientation, its density, its resistance to the particular forms of weathering that acted on this landscape, allowed it to remain when the rest went. The Anangu relationship with Uluru is itself an instance of persistence. The culture has survived colonization in the way that Uluru has survived erosion. Not without damage, not without loss, not without change. But the core has remained. The Chukopa continues. The knowledge is still held. The ceremonies are still performed. The rock and its people have survived together. This is perhaps the deepest teaching of Uluru. Not a lesson about geology or ecology or cultural tradition. A lesson about what survives, about what in the end cannot be removed from the world, however much force is brought against it. Some things are simply meant to remain. 30. The ongoing story. We have traveled through 30 dimensions of a place that deserves a lifetime of attention and repays every hour given to it with something new. We have barely begun. Uluru is not a finished subject. It is not a topic that can be mastered or comprehended or filed away as understood. It is an ongoing reality, a living site, a place where the oldest continuous culture on Earth continues to live its life and maintain its knowledge and perform its ceremonies and pass its stories to the next generation. The story that the title of tonight's exploration suggests, the idea of the stump of a tree that once touched the sky, is a poetic frame for something that needs no poetic frame. The reality of Uluru is stranger and more beautiful than any metaphor. A rock that is mostly underground. A sacred site that is 60,000 years old. A knowledge tradition so deep that most of it cannot be shared with visitors. A people who have maintained their relationship with this place through everything that history has thrown at them. If you visit Uluru, and if you are given the opportunity, sit with it. Not near it, not photographing it, not checking the time before the bus leaves. Sit with it. Give it an hour of your full attention. Watch what the light does. Listen to what the wind does. Feel what the ground does under you, the warmth of the red earth that has absorbed the sun's energy across more days than you can count. And know that you are not the first person to sit in that particular place and give that particular attention. You are one in a line stretching back 60,000 years. The attention you bring is new. The place you're bringing it to is ancient beyond comprehension. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is, in its way, everything. The desert is quiet. The rock holds its warmth. The stars above are extraordinary. Somewhere underground, the frogs are waiting. In a cave somewhere at the base of the rock, art that was made by a person who lived 10,000 years ago is still on the wall, still visible, still speaking in a language that very few people are left who can read. The desert oaks stand in the dark. The spinifex hisses in the wind. Uluru remains as it has always remained, as it will remain when everything else we know is gone. Rest now if rest is what you need. The rock will be here in the morning, and in the morning after that, and in the mornings of all the mornings to come, changing color in the light, channeling water to its hollows, making its sounds in the night, being what it is, without apology, without performance, without any need for our understanding. It simply is. And that, in the end, is enough. But there is still more. There is always more, when the subject is a place this layered and this patient. The night is long, the desert is wide, the rock has been waiting longer than we have been asking questions. Let us continue. 31. The mosses and ferns that should not exist. On the shaded southern and southwestern faces of Uluru, in the splash zones beneath the waterfalls that form during rain, in the dampest corners of the most protected overhangs, there are plants that have no right to be there. Mosses, ferns, plants that require consistent moisture in an environment that is reliably and profoundly dry for most of the year. They exist because Uluru creates its own microclimate. The evaporation from the water holes and the water-laden rock surface after rain, the shade that the rock creates for the plants on its flanks, the way the rock moderates temperature and retains moisture in its cracks and hollows, all of this combines to create pockets of humidity and a landscape of dryness. These pockets are small. In some cases, they are only a few square meters, but within them, life finds what it needs. The ferns at Uluru are the same species found in moist, temperate environments thousands of kilometers away. They are relict populations, isolated populations that represent the edge of a range that has been retreating as the Australian interior dried over millions of years. They cling to the specific microhabitats that Uluru provides, and they have been clinging there for long enough that they have become part of the ecological story of the place. For the Anangu, these plants are not anomalies. They are evidence of the rock's capacity to sustain life, of the way Uluru provides what the surrounding desert cannot. They are part of the reason why Uluru is understood as a living presence, because the rock is demonstrably life-giving in a way that is visible and measurable, and has been visible and measurable for as long as anyone has been there to see it. The mosses after rain are remarkable. A face of Uluru that is bare red rock in dry conditions becomes, within days of significant rainfall, covered in a vivid green that seems almost violent in contrast with the red and orange of the surrounding surface. The mosses grow quickly, taking advantage of the brief window of moisture, and then dry out and go dormant again, a familiar suspension that characterizes life in desert environments. They are not dead when they are dry, they are waiting. The waiting life of the desert is one of its most profound qualities. So much of what lives in arid environments is suspended, dormant, postponed, holding itself in reserve for the moment when conditions allow. The frogs underground, the mosses on the rock, the seeds in the soil that have been waiting years or decades for the specific combination of rainfall and temperature that will trigger their germination. The desert looks empty. It is full of life that is waiting. 32. The ochre and its journey. The ochre of the Uluru region did not stay at Uluru. It travelled. For tens of thousands of years before European contact fundamentally disrupted the exchange networks of Central Australia. Ochre from the deposits near Uluru moved through trade routes that connected communities across the continent. Trade in pre-contact Australia was more extensive and more sophisticated than many people realise. Items moved along established routes, passing from hand to hand through a series of exchanges that could carry a specific piece of material thousands of kilometres from its source. Shells from the northern coast appeared in the desert interior. Ochre from the central desert appeared in coastal communities. Specific types of stone for toolmaking were traded across continental distances. The ochre from the Uluru region was valued for its quality. Different ochre deposits produce pigments of different consistency, colour saturation, and permanence. The red ochre from this region was considered among the best available, and it moved accordingly, traded across distances that represent extraordinary journeys in a landscape where travel is difficult and water is scarce. To understand the scale of these exchange networks is to understand something important about the cultures that maintained them. These were not isolated bands of people surviving in small groups, with no contact with the wider world. They were participants in continental-scale networks of exchange, information, ceremony, and relationship. The ochre of Uluru connected its custodians to people they may never have directly met, but with whom they shared a network of obligation and reciprocity. When ochre from Uluru was applied to a body in ceremony 1,000 kilometers away, Uluru was present in that ceremony. The material connection between the pigment and the place maintained a relationship across distance. The land traveled with its people through the substances it produced, through the materials that were exchanged and used and applied in the context of ceremony and art and community life. 33. The geology of the nearby plain. The plain that surrounds Uluru deserves as much attention as the rock itself, though it receives far less. The red desert floor around Uluru is not simple. It is a complex environment that has been shaped by the same forces that shaped the rock, and it tells its own version of the same 500 million year story. The sand of the surrounding desert is largely derived from the erosion of the same rock formations that produced Uluru. The feldspar and quartz that made up the ancient Arkose sandstone have been breaking down for hundreds of millions of years, and the products of that breakdown have accumulated as the red, sandy soil of the desert floor. In a very literal sense, the desert floor is made of former mountains. It is the powdered remnant of what was here before, dissolved and redeposited by wind and water across geological time. The dunes of the Central Australian desert are not the product of recent events. Some of them are ancient, formed under different climatic conditions than exist today, and maintained in roughly their current form by vegetation that stabilized them as the climate changed. The spinifex grass that covers the dunes is not just a feature of the landscape. It is a structural element, its roots holding the sand in place against the wind that would otherwise disperse it. The relationship between the dunes and the flat interdune areas, the relationship between the vegetated dune crests and the bare interdune pans, creates a microhabitat mosaic that supports a diversity of species that would not be possible in a uniform environment. The patchwork of different soil textures, different moisture retention, different sun exposure, different vegetation types creates niches for species that specialize in different conditions. This complexity is part of what the Anangu manage when they manage the land. Traditional burning practices did not treat the landscape as uniform. They targeted specific habitats at specific times, creating the kind of patchwork that maximizes biodiversity by ensuring that different areas are at different stages of ecological succession at any given time. The land management was sophisticated and precise, calibrated to the specific ecological requirements of each species and habitat type. 34. The rock art technique. The rock art at Uluru was made using techniques that required both knowledge and preparation. Ochre, as a pigment, needs to be ground and mixed with a binder to adhere to the rock surface. Different binders produce different consistencies and different degrees of permanence. The knowledge of which materials to use, how to prepare them, how to apply them to different rock surfaces in ways that would be durable, is itself a form of expertise accumulated over thousands of years. The surfaces chosen for art at Uluru were not random. Protected overhangs that shielded the art from direct rain and intense sun, rock surfaces that had a texture that held pigment well, specific sites that had Chukupa significance, and that were appropriate for the specific stories being recorded. The placement of art at Uluru reflects knowledge of both material properties and sacred geography. Some of the engraved art at Uluru, the lines scratched directly into the rock surface, is potentially very old. Petroglyphs, as engraved rock art is called, can sometimes be dated by the degree to which the engraved surface has been re-weathered, and by the patina that develops on exposed rock surfaces over time. The deeply weathered engravings at some sites in Australia have been estimated at tens of thousands of years old. The art at Uluru that shows similar degrees of weathering may be comparable in age. What the art depicts in the portions accessible to visitors ranges from abstract geometric patterns to more representational images. The geometric patterns, grids and circles and lines and dots, are often connected to specific aspects of the Chukupa, to topographic features, to the tracks of ancestral beings, to the structure of the landscape as understood in the knowledge tradition. They are not random decoration, they are a specific visual language. The representational images include tracks of animals, human figures, the outline of the rock itself in certain configurations. These images are recognizable in a way that the geometric patterns are not, and they invite interpretation by visitors who lack the specific knowledge to read the geometric tradition. But the interpretations that visitors bring, often from the visual conventions of their own traditions, are usually wrong. The meaning of the images at Uluru is specific, culturally embedded, and not translatable into the visual conventions of other traditions without substantial distortion. 35. The heat mirage. On very hot days at Uluru, the desert floor beyond the immediate surroundings of the rock shimmers with mirages. The phenomenon of the heat mirage, the appearance of water on the desert floor produced by the refraction of light through layers of air at different temperatures, is one of the classic features of arid landscapes. At Uluru, the mirage can make the distant desert appear to be a lake, a shimmering blue expanse that seems just out of reach. The physics of the mirage is well understood. Near the desert floor, the air is extremely hot. Above it, the air is somewhat cooler. The light from the sky, bending as it passes through the boundary between these air layers, appears to come from the ground rather than the sky. The brain, which expects that blue means sky, interprets the blue as a reflection, and a reflection of sky on a flat surface means water. For anyone traveling through the desert without the knowledge to recognize and dismiss this illusion, the mirage is dangerous. It promises water that is not there. It draws travelers toward a horizon that retreats as you approach it. In a landscape where finding water is the most urgent practical concern, seeing what appears to be a lake in the distance and then discovering it is an optical illusion is the kind of experience that has ended lives. The Anangu know the mirage. They have names for it and knowledge of when it appears and how to recognize it as the illusion it is. This knowledge is survival knowledge of the most direct kind. Not being deceived by the desert, not following false promises to your death in an environment that offers no second chances, is the kind of learning that is embedded in a tradition accumulated over 60,000 years of living in this specific place. The mirage also has a different significance in the Chukupa framework. The way the desert can appear to offer what it does not have, the way water can seem to be present where it is not, is understood as a feature of the landscape that has to be known and navigated with knowledge. The land is not always straightforward. It requires the kind of knowing that only comes from long attention. 36. The particular quality of the dust. The dust of Central Australia has a particular quality. It is extraordinarily fine, finer than most desert dust because the particles have been ground by wind and water action for longer than most desert dust has existed. In the dry months, the desert floor is so desiccated and the particles so fine that any disturbance, a vehicle passing, a group of visitors walking, a dust devil picking up energy from the hot ground, can produce a cloud that rises meters into the air and hangs suspended for minutes before settling. This dust gets into everything. It is the characteristic sensory signature of the Central Australian desert, the red dust in your eyes and in your hair and in your clothes, the dust that finds its way into sealed containers and washes out of fabric for days after you return to a more temperate environment. It is the material of the landscape, redistributed constantly by the wind, settling and rising and settling again in an endless circulation. The dust at Uluru is the rock. The iron oxide that colors the surface of Uluru is the same material that colors the dust that blows across the desert around it. The dust is Uluru in a dispersed form, the outermost layer of the formation continuously being removed and redistributed by the wind, carried to places that may be hundreds of kilometers from the source. In a very material sense, Uluru travels. It sends itself outward in all directions, slowly, invisibly, continuously. The Anangu understanding of the relationship between the rock and the surrounding landscape is not metaphorical when it describes Uluru as central to the region. The rock is literally present in the soil of the surrounding desert, in the red dust that hangs in the air, in the color of the earth for a considerable distance in all directions. Its material presence extends far beyond its visible boundaries. 37. The desert after dark. The desert around Uluru transforms after dark in ways that daytime visitors never see. The heat leaves the air quickly once the sun goes down. The temperature drops at a rate that surprises people used to the thermal retention of urban environments. By midnight, what was a scorching afternoon landscape has become cool, sometimes genuinely cold, with a clarity to the air that the day's heat never allows. The animals that come out after dark are different from the ones that move during daylight. Nocturnal species dominate the desert night. Dashurids, small marsupial carnivores, hunt through the spinifex for insects and small vertebrates. Snakes move in the cooler air, their metabolism functioning better in temperatures that would slow them during the day's heat. Owls hunt from the air, using the darkness as an advantage over prey that cannot see them coming. The night sky above the desert is different from any other sky. The density of stars visible from a site with truly dark skies is difficult to describe to anyone who's only seen the night sky from a city or suburb. The Milky Way is not a faint smudge. It is a structure, a complex three-dimensional architecture of light that fills half the sky. Individual features within it are visible: the dark lanes of the Great Rift, the star clouds of the galactic center, the external galaxies that are visible as faint smudges to the naked eye under truly dark skies. The Anangu night sky tradition is one of the most developed in the world, precisely because they have been observing from one of the best natural observatories on Earth, a flat desert with extremely clear dry air, far from any source of artificial light, for 60,000 years. The knowledge encoded in their astronomical traditions is the product of more sustained and careful sky observation than any other culture can claim. And above the desert, above the spinifex and the desert oaks and the silent rock, the dark emu of the Milky Way turns slowly through the night, as it has turned since before there were human eyes to watch it, as it will turn after. The stars do not care about us, but they are extraordinarily beautiful, and in the desert silence, looking up at the full weight of the galaxy above you, it is easy to understand why the people who have lived under this sky for 60,000 years made it central to their knowledge system. 38. The regeneration after fire. Fire has been part of the ecology of Australia for as long as there has been Australian vegetation to burn. The continent is fire adapted in a way that no other continent is, because its evolution happened in a context of frequent fire, both lightning-caused fires and the deliberately managed fires of the Aboriginal people who have been part of the landscape for 65,000 years. The vegetation around Uluru burns. The spinifex, which is the dominant ground cover, is extraordinarily flammable when dry. It burns fast and hot, and in a dry year the fires can cover large areas. After the fire, the landscape looks devastated. The black ground, the burned spinifex stems, the ash, create an appearance of total destruction. But within weeks, the regeneration begins. The spinifex regrows from its root crowns, which are protected underground, and survive most fires. The seeds of many desert species require fire to germinate, their coating softened by heat or their germination triggered by the chemicals and smoke. Wildflowers appear in burned areas with a speed and density that seems impossible, exploiting the flush of nutrients released by the fire and the temporarily reduced competition from the spinifex. Animals that were displaced by the fire return. New animal communities develop in the post-fire landscape. Species that specialize in early post-fire habitats, that find in the burned and regenerating country something they cannot find elsewhere. The sequence of ecological communities that develops after fire in the Australian desert is as predictable and specific as the sequence that develops after any other disturbance, a procession of species, each of which prepares the ground for the next. The Anangu understood this and used it. By burning at specific times and in specific patterns, they could produce the habitat mosaic that supported the widest diversity of species, ensuring that animals with different habitat requirements all found what they needed within a manageable range. This is sophisticated ecological management, not the primitive burning that colonial narratives sometimes described. After fire, Uluru stands. The rock does not burn. The surfaces may be blackened by smoke, but the stone itself is unchanged. The fire that moves through the landscape around the rock leaves the rock itself unaffected. And in the aftermath of fire, with the burned plain around it and the green regeneration beginning, Uluru is even more starkly itself, even more clearly the persistent thing in a landscape of constant change. 39. The time it takes to know a place. The Anangu relationship with Uluru is not the product of casual observation. It is the result of the kind of attention that very few people in the modern world give to anything. Sustained attention over a lifetime, combined with the accumulated attention of all the lifetimes that came before, transmitted through the knowledge tradition, creates a depth of knowing that has no equivalent in any formal educational context. To know Uluru in the Anangu way, you would need to sit with it in every season and in every kind of weather. You would need to know what it looks like before rain, when it looks like during rain, what it does after rain. You would need to know what it sounds like in the heat of the afternoon and in the cold of pre-dawn. You would need to know the specific locations of every waterhole and every cave and every significant feature. And you would need to know the stories that explain each of these features and the ceremonies that relate to them. And then you would need to hold all of that in relationship with the wider landscape, the connections between Uluru and Kata Tjuta, the songlines that cross the region and what they mean, the seasonal movements of animals and how those movements relate to the features of the rock, the position of specific stars and what their appearance in specific positions means about what should be done in the landscape at that time. This is years of learning, decades, a lifetime. And then the knowledge passes to the next generation, who add their own observations to what they have received, who deepen the tradition with their own attention, who maintain the relationship while the world around them changes. The Anangu who speak about Uluru in interviews and documentary films are not reciting a tradition they have memorized. They are speaking from a living relationship with a place they know as intimately as it is possible to know anything. The knowledge is in their bodies as well as their minds. It is in the way they move through the landscape, what they notice, what they attend to, what they understand, without having to think about it. This is what it means to be a traditional custodian. Not ownership in the legal sense, though ownership in the legal sense has been partially restored through land rights legislation, but custodianship in the deeper sense. Responsibility for a place, obligation to it, the requirement to know it well enough to maintain it, which means knowing it so well that you become, in a sense, a part of it. 40. The ongoing conversation. Uluru speaks, not in words, not in any language that a recorder can capture or a translator can render into English, but in the way places speak, in the way that any deeply known and attended to location communicates its nature to those who have learned how to receive it. It speaks in the color changes throughout the day, in the sounds it makes at night, in the way water moves on its surface, in the specific pattern of shadow and light that it casts on the surrounding desert at different times of year, in the animals that live at its base and in the ecological communities that it sustains in the surrounding landscape, in the way it holds heat and releases it slowly, moderating the extremes of an extreme environment. The Anangu are in conversation with Uluru. The ceremonies they perform at the site are their part of that conversation, their contribution to an exchange that has been ongoing for 60,000 years. The ceremonies do not just extract meaning from the place, they also give something back. They are an expression of the relationship, a maintenance of the connection, a fulfillment of the obligations that the relationship entails. Modern visitors to Uluru often feel something at the site that they struggle to describe. A sense of presence, a feeling that the rock is aware in some way, or that the site is charged with something that is not accounted for by the geology or the ecology or the cultural significance. People who are not religious, who have no framework for sacred experience, report feeling moved, quieted, affected by the place in ways that they did not expect and cannot easily explain. The Anangu would not be surprised by this. They would say that Uluru has a reality that extends beyond what the eye can see, and the ear can hear, and the mind can conceptually grasp. They would say that the feeling of presence is the presence, that the sense of being in relationship with something vast and alive and aware is not an illusion produced by the combination of beauty and remoteness. They would say that Uluru is what it appears to be, and perhaps, in the end, after everything, that is what there is to say. That Uluru is what it appears to be, something ancient, something present, something that has survived everything and remains, something that is in ongoing relationship with the people who have known it longest, and with the landscape it presides over, and with the sky above it, and with the time that passes around and through and over everything. The stump of a tree that once touched the sky, the remnant of mountains that no longer exist, the junction of songlines that cross a continent, the waterhole in the desert, the archive of 60,000 years, the clock, the shelter, the mirror, the calendar, the sacred site, the rock, Uluru still here, still patient, still waiting if we want to believe it waits, for the questions that are worth asking, the ones that stay open, the ones that deepen over time rather than closing into answers. There is a particular quality to the silence of a long night in a place as old and quiet as this. The mind that has been moving through these facts and stories and images begins, if given enough time and enough quiet, to slow down. The rate of thought decreases, the gaps between thoughts lengthen. The darkness behind the eyes becomes something to rest in rather than something to fill. This is what the desert offers, not emptiness, fullness of a different kind, fullness of quiet, fullness of time, the sense of having entered something that was here before you and will be hereafter, that neither requires your presence nor resents it, that simply continues as it has always continued, as it will always continue. Let the rock hold you, if that is a thought that helps. Let the image of it, warm and red in the desert dark, be the last thing the visual mind carries before it releases into sleep. The desert oaks stand in the dark, the spinifex hisses in the low wind. The stars turn above, the dark emu slowly moving through its circuit, marking the season, calling the appropriate response from those who know how to read it. And Uluru remains, as it has always remained, warm and red and ancient and patient and present and here. Here, rest now. The desert is waiting to be still with you. The rock has been holding this quiet for 500 million years and has plenty left. There is no need to hurry anywhere. There is no need to understand everything. There is no need to do anything except allow the length and the quiet and the weight of what we have moved through tonight to settle into whatever part of you receives these things. The night is long, the stars are bright, the rock is warm. Sleep well. But if sleep has not yet come, there is more. There is always more, with a place this deep and a night this long. Let us continue moving through what Uluru offers, slowly, without urgency, in the way that the desert itself moves through its hours. 41. The Sacred Water Serpent. In many of the Aboriginal knowledge traditions of Australia, including the traditions of the Anangu, there is a being known in various languages by various names, sometimes translated into English as the rainbow serpent. This is one of the most widespread figures in the continent's Chukurpa traditions, appearing in different forms and with different specific stories in different regions, but consistently connected to water, to the creation of waterways, to the dangerous power of bodies of water, to the movement of the seasons. At Uluru, the waterhole Amutujulu is connected to an ancestral water serpent in the Chukurpa stories. The specific details of this connection are restricted knowledge, not available to visitors in their full form. But the connection itself is publicly acknowledged, and it represents something important about how the Anangu understand water. Water in the desert is not neutral. It is not simply a physical resource that is in short supply. It is sacred. It is dangerous. It is the most powerful thing in an arid environment, capable of giving life and taking it with equal efficiency. The flood that fills a dry creek bed can also sweep away anyone standing in it. The waterhole that sustains life through the dry season is also a place where predators gather, where risk concentrates along with opportunity. The stories that connect water features to powerful ancestral beings encode this ambivalence. The water serpent is not simply benevolent. It is powerful in ways that require respect. You approach the waterhole with awareness of what you're approaching, with the knowledge that this place has a nature that exceeds your own, that the proper relationship is one of respect rather than casual use. This is a sophisticated ecological attitude embedded in a spiritual framework. To treat water as sacred, to approach it with respect and care, is also to be more careful about how you use it, more aware of its limits, less likely to waste it. The spiritual attitude produces the practical behavior that survival in a desert environment requires. The rainbow serpent stories at sites like Uluru are not just mythology. They are ecological instruction, encoded in a form that is memorable and powerful and transmissible across generations without requiring a written language. 42. The children who learn. The knowledge of Uluru is not only held by elders, it is being transmitted right now, today, to the next generation of Anangu children who will grow up at or near the site, who will learn through the combination of formal instruction from elders and direct experience of the landscape that is the traditional Anangu educational method. Children in Anangu communities learn about their country by being in it. They learn the names of plants by being shown plants and told their names and shown what the plants do. They learn the tracks of animals by following experienced trackers and being taught to read the stories that the ground tells. They learn the stories of the Chukurpa by hearing them told at appropriate times, in appropriate contexts, by the people who are authorized to tell them. This educational method is sometimes dismissed as informal or unsystematic. It is neither. It is a highly structured educational system that has produced graduates capable of surviving in one of the most demanding environments on Earth, of navigating landscapes of hundreds of thousands of square kilometers without maps, of finding water in places where no water appears to be, of living in right relationship with a landscape that is simultaneously beautiful and dangerous. The children who are learning about Uluru today will carry that knowledge into their adult lives, and they will make decisions about the site, about its management and its presentation to visitors and its ceremonial maintenance on the basis of that knowledge. The tradition is not dying. It is being transmitted. It is alive in the youngest generation of Anangu, even as it was alive in the oldest. This is one of the most profound things about Uluru, not just that it has been sacred for 60,000 years, but that it will be sacred for the foreseeable future, because the knowledge that makes it sacred is being passed to people who will hold it and pass it on in turn. 43. The geometry of the rock. Uluru from above, seen in aerial photographs, has a shape that is difficult to describe simply. It is roughly oval, but an oval with variations, with a long axis running approximately east to west. The top of the rock is not flat. It is a complex surface of ridges and hollows, channels and depressions, some of which hold water after rain, and some of which serve as the headwaters of the channels that run down the face of the rock. The ridges and channels on the top of Uluru are the tops of the vertical strata, the edges of the layers of sandstone that were tilted nearly vertical by tectonic forces. The hardest strata stand slightly proud of the softer ones, creating a corrugated surface that, seen from the air, looks almost like the grain of wood or the rings in a cross-section of a tree trunk. This is not coincidental to the title of tonight's exploration. The image of a tree stump with its concentric rings, its wood grain, its suggestion of something that was once alive and now persists, is genuinely evoked by the surface of Uluru seen from above. The parallel ridges of the exposed strata edges, running across the top of the formation, do look like something organic, like something that grew rather than something that deposited and compressed and lifted and eroded. The imagination reaches for organic metaphors when confronted with Uluru, because the rock does not fit the visual vocabulary of most people's experience of geology. It is too complete, too singular, too deliberate in its presence. The eye looks for a category and cannot find one except in the organic world, where things grow to specific shapes for specific reasons rather than accumulating to accidental ones. The tree stump is a metaphor, but it is a metaphor that reveals something true about the experience of Uluru. It is not just a remnant, it is a remnant that seems purposeful, a thing left behind by something larger, something whose full scale we cannot reconstruct from what remains, something whose roots go deeper than we can see. 44. What the scientists have not yet measured. Science is extraordinarily good at certain kinds of knowing. It measures things precisely. It creates models that generate accurate predictions. It builds understanding of mechanism, of how processes work at the level of physics and chemistry and biology. It produces knowledge that can be tested, challenged, revised, and improved over time. But science, as currently practiced, is not good at knowing what a place means. It can tell you what Uluru is made of. It cannot tell you what Uluru is for. It can measure the rate at which the surface oxidizes. It cannot measure the depth of the relationship between the Anangu and the rock. It can date the art on the cave walls. It cannot read what the art says. These are not criticisms of science, they are descriptions of its scope, which is not unlimited. The things that science measures well are real and important. The things that science does not measure well are also real and important. The knowledge that the Anangu hold about Uluru is not less valid, because it cannot be expressed in the language of physics or chemistry. It is simply a different kind of knowledge, arrived at through a different method, organized according to different principles. What would it mean to take seriously the idea that the Anangu knowledge of Uluru is as valid and as real as the geological knowledge, not instead of it? Alongside it, two different ways of knowing the same place, each capturing something that the other cannot. The geological knowledge tells us that Uluru is an inselberg of Arcos sandstone formed 550 million years ago, currently eroding at a rate of millimeters per century, likely extending several kilometers below the surface. The Tjukurpa knowledge tells us that Uluru was created during the creation period by the actions of specific ancestral beings, that it is connected to specific sites across the continent by songlines, that it has specific responsibilities in the ongoing maintenance of the world, and that its relationship with the Anangu is one of mutual obligation and care. Both of these are true. Both of these are useful. Neither of them is complete. The most honest approach to Uluru is one that holds both kinds of knowing without requiring them to be synthesized into a single account. The rock is 550 million years old, and it was made during the Tjukurpa. These statements can coexist in a mind that is willing to hold complexity without collapsing it. 45. The return to stillness. We have now traveled a long way tonight, through geological time, through 60,000 years of human relationship with a specific place, through the ecology of a desert that should not sustain the life it does, through the art on the cave walls and the music of the songlines and the astronomy of the dark emu, and the hydrology of a rock that gathers water in a landscape of dryness, through the stories of Lunkata and the mala and the water serpent, through the ochre that traveled a continent and the ceremonies that continue and the children who are learning, through the thermal contraction sounds and the post-sunset glow and the heat mirage and the mosses that should not be there, through the geometry of the rock seen from above and the questions that science cannot ask and the knowledge that is too deep to share with visitors. It is a great deal to carry. It is perhaps more than the mind can hold all at once, and perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps Uluru should not be held all at once. Perhaps the right relationship to a place of this depth and this age is one that is never finished, that always has more to offer, that cannot be captured in a single visit or a single night of listening. The appropriate response to Uluru, to everything that Uluru is and contains and means and expresses, might simply be this: to sit with it, to be quiet in its presence, even if the presence is imagined, even if it exists only in the words that have moved through this night and the images they have created, to allow the scale of it to have its effect, which is something like the effect that any genuine encounter with what is ancient and vast and indifferent and beautiful produces in a human mind. The rock does not need our admiration. It does not need our understanding. It does not need anything from us at all, in the sense that a geological formation does not have needs. But the Anangu, who are its custodians, who have maintained their relationship with it through everything that history has brought against them, who continue to hold the knowledge and perform the ceremonies and pass the stories to the next generation, they do need something from the wider world. They need the respect that is owed to the deepest knowledge tradition on Earth. They need the recognition that the place they have been protecting for 60,000 years is not just a tourist attraction or a geological curiosity or a symbol of Australia. It is a living sacred site, actively maintained by living people, continuously relevant to a continuing culture. And Uluru itself, the rock, the place, if it is anything beyond geology, if the Anangu understanding of it carries any truth, it needs what it has always needed: the ceremony, the story, the song, the maintained relationship, the knowledge passed to the next generation, the attention of those who know how to attend. Give it that, if you can. Give it your attention for whatever portion of this night remains. Let the image of it settle into whatever quiet is available to you. The red rock in the desert dark, the stars above it, the desert floor around it, red and ancient and patient and full of waiting life. The rock that is mostly underground, that extends kilometers into the earth, that has been here for 500 million years and will be here for however many more the earth allows. Rest, the desert is still, the rock is warm, the night is long and the stars are bright, and the dark MU turns slowly through its circuit above a place that has been known and loved and tended for longer than any other place on earth. You are held. Whatever it is that holds you, you are held. Sleep well. But perhaps the night is not quite ready to be still. Perhaps you are the kind of person who finds that the mind settles best when it has been given something to rest on, something to hold, something to carry into the softer state. If that is you, then here is more. 46. The specific red. There is a painter's question that has been asked about Uluru many times. What is the exact color? Not red in general, the specific red, the particular wavelength and saturation and value of the color that Uluru presents to the eye at the specific moment that is most itself, most completely what it is. Painters who have tried to answer this question have filled journals with their attempts. Arthur Boyd, Sidney Nolan, Albert Namatjira, who was himself a Western Aranda man from Central Australia, and who painted the landscapes of his country with an intimacy that no outsider could match, all of them tried to capture the specific red of the Central Australian rock. None of them claimed to have succeeded. All of them reported the same experience, that the color shifts, that you mix what you think is right, and then the light changes and you start again. The red of Uluru is not a fixed thing, it is a process. It is the color of a surface that is continuously in relationship with the light that falls on it, and since the light changes continuously, the color changes with it. To paint the red of Uluru would require painting the relationship between the rock and the sun at a specific moment, and by the time you finish, the moment is gone. This is true of many things: the color of the sea, the color of leaves in autumn, the color of a face in a particular light at a particular moment that will not come again. Beauty that is temporally specific is beauty that resists capture, and the resistance is part of what makes it beautiful. The Anangu do not try to capture the color of Uluru, they live with it. It is the color of home, in the way that the specific quality of light in any deeply known place becomes the quality of light that the mind returns to when it needs to locate itself. The red of Uluru is what the Anangu see when they think of country, when they are away from it and longing for it, when they need to remember who they are and where they belong. 47. The underground network. Beneath the desert floor around Uluru, there's a network that most visitors do not think about. The roots of the desert plants extend far underground, following moisture, following the minute gradients of soil fertility, creating a subterranean architecture that is in some ways as complex as what is visible above ground. The roots of the desert oak can extend 30 meters or more below the surface, reaching down through layers of sand and clay and hardpan to find the water table or the capillary fringe above it. The roots of the spinifex, though less dramatic in their depth, spread laterally across considerable distances, creating a web that holds the surface together against the wind. In the ground beneath Uluru itself, water moves through fractures in the rock, through the spaces between layers, through pathways created by millions of years of water flow. The aquifer that the water holes at the base of the rock tap into is fed by this subsurface movement. Water percolating down through the rock from its surface and moving through it to emerge at points where the fracture system intersects with the base of the formation. The underground network is alive, not just with plant roots, but with soil organisms, with the bacteria and fungi and microinvertebrates that make up the unseen majority of life in any terrestrial ecosystem. The soil at Uluru, like all soils, is a community of inconceivable density and complexity, living within the mineral matrix that the geology provides, cycling nutrients, breaking down organic matter, creating the conditions that the plants and animals above ground depend on. The Anangu understanding of the land as alive extends to this underground dimension, not in the specific biological terms that a soil scientist would use, but in the broader recognition that the ground itself is not inert, that below the surface, as above it, the land is active and generative and connected. 48. The quality of attention. Throughout this night, the quality of attention you have brought to what has been described here determines what you have received from it. This is always true, but it is especially true with a subject like Uluru, which exists at a scale and a depth that easily exceeds the attention of a distracted mind. The Anangu concept of attention to country, the deep, sustained, generationally accumulated attention that produces genuine knowledge of a place, is not achievable in a single night. But the direction of that attention, the orientation of the mind toward a place with genuine curiosity and genuine respect, can be practiced in any context, with any place. The rock you pass every day on your way to somewhere, the tree that has been growing in that corner of a field longer than anyone can remember. the specific quality of light in the place where you live at the specific time of year when the angle of the sun creates the shadow that falls across the floor in a particular way. These things repay attention. They do not reveal themselves quickly. They take time and repetition and a willingness to notice what you have previously overlooked. Uluru is an extreme case. It is a place so extreme in its age and its scale and its cultural depth that it forces the question of attention on anyone who comes near it, even in the mediated way of sitting with a description of it in a night when sleep is slow in arriving. But the question it forces is a question that can be asked of any place. Am I paying attention? Do I know where I am? Have I given this place the time and care that would allow it to show me what it is? The Anangu have been paying attention to Uluru for 60,000 years. They know what it is. They carry that knowledge and maintain it and express it in ceremony and story and art. And they ask, quietly, consistently, without aggression or resentment, that visitors approach the place with something of the same respect, not the same depth, that cannot be transmitted in an afternoon or a lifetime for someone not born into the tradition, but something of the same orientation, the orientation of respect, of humility, of willingness to receive rather than simply to take. 49. The other name. There is a name for Uluru that is not publicly shared. As with many sacred sites in the world's deepest knowledge traditions, there are multiple levels of naming, multiple layers of how a place is referred to, and the deepest level is not available to those outside the tradition. The name we use, Uluru, is already a sacred name. It is not a casual descriptor. It is a name that carries the weight of 60,000 years of relationship. But within the Anangu tradition, there are dimensions of naming that go deeper, that are used only in specific ceremonial contexts, that encode information about the place that is not appropriate for general circulation. This is not unusual. Many of the world's sacred traditions distinguish between exoteric and esoteric knowledge, between what is available to the general community and what is available to those who have been initiated into the inner circle of knowledge. The Anangu version of this distinction is simply older and perhaps more carefully maintained than most. To know that there are deeper names is to know something important about the structure of sacred knowledge. It is a reminder that what we have access to, as visitors, as outsiders, as people who have arrived late in the history of this place, is not the whole. There is more. There is always more. The knowledge tradition extends deeper than any visitor can reach, and this is as it should be. 50. The long farewell. This is not the end of Uluru. Uluru does not end. It will be there in the morning, and in the morning after that, and in every morning for as long as the desert exists, and the processes of erosion continue their work at the pace they have been working, which is to say for a very long time. What ends is tonight's particular journey through what Uluru is and means and offers to those who pay it attention. We have moved through 50 dimensions of a place that has 10,000 dimensions more. We have barely begun, which is both humbling and reassuring. Humbling because it suggests that no amount of attention will ever be sufficient. Reassuring because it means there's always more to discover, always more reason to return in imagination or in person to this ancient and patient place. The image to carry into sleep, if an image is what the settling mind needs, is a simple one. The rock in the desert at the end of day, the sun going down behind the flat horizon of the surrounding plain, the light changing on the face of the rock, moving through the sequence of colors that it has been moving through every evening for 500 million years, the red deepening as the sun lowers, the post-sunset glow holding after everything else has gone dark, the first stars appearing above a rock that knows them as intimately as anything knows anything on this earth. The desert cooling, the rock groaning softly in its contraction, the silence that is full of sound, the spinifex hissing in the night wind, the desert oak standing in the dark with their roots reaching down for what they need, and Uluru warm and red and ancient, holding the warmth of the day in its vast mineral body, slowly releasing it into the desert night. Patient as only something 500 million years old can be patient, present in the way that only something this real and this ancient can be present, here, still here, as it has always been here, as it will be here long after tonight, long after all the nights that will follow tonight, long into a future that none of us can see, and that the rock itself, indifferent and enduring, will witness without comment. Sleep now. Let the rock hold its warmth in your imagination. Let the desert be still around it. Let the stars turn above, the dark emu completing its circuit, the galactic center rising and setting in its season. The stars that the Anangu have named and tracked and used for 60,000 years, doing what they have always done. And let the knowing that some things endure, that some knowledge is deep enough to hold across more generations than we can count, that some places are more than what they appear, and more than what we can understand, and more than what any single night of careful attention can contain. Let that knowing be the last thing the mind carries before it finally lets go and allows the rest that this long night has been offering. You are somewhere on a planet that is 4.5 billion years old. You are in a time that will not come again. The rock in the desert is older than anything you have seen today, and it knows nothing of your concerns, and it will be there tomorrow and the day after, and in the days that no one living will see. That is enough. That is more than enough. That, in its way, is everything. Good night. The desert does not demand anything of you in these last moments. It simply continues as it always continues, without urgency, without the particular pressure that most environments press upon the people moving through them. The Central Australian night is one of the few places left on Earth where you can feel, genuinely feel, and not just intellectually understand that the world does not revolve around human concerns. The desert was here before us. It will be here after. The rock at its center has witnessed the rise and fall of species that no longer exist, the movement of continents, the changing of climate so fundamental that the landscapes of the past would be unrecognizable to us. It has seen ice ages and the retreat of ice ages. It has sat in its red patience while the sea levels of the surrounding ocean rose and fell and rose again. And through all of that, the Anangu have been there, sitting at the base of the rock, watching the colors change, listening to the sounds it makes at night, collecting the water it channels to its hollows, telling its stories to their children, performing the ceremonies that maintain the relationship between the living and the land, passing the knowledge from hand to hand across generations so numerous that counting them would take longer than this night allows. This is the thing to carry into sleep, not a fact about the geology, not a specific story from the Chukurpa, not a color or a sound or an image of the rock in a particular quality of light, though all of those are good things to carry, but this, the simple knowledge that the deepest form of relationship a human culture can have with a place has been happening at Uluru for 60,000 years, and it is still happening, and it will still be happening tomorrow. And the knowledge that makes it possible is alive and being transmitted to the next generation, even as we sit here in the dark and allow the night to do its work. The world is very old, some knowledge is very deep, some places are worth paying attention to for a very long time. Some relationships are worth maintaining across more generations than any single person can count. Sleep now. The rock is warm, the night is long, and Uluru remains. There is something that happens in the mind when it has been given enough. Not too much and not too little, but enough. The threshold is different for every person. Some minds reach it quickly in the first minutes of stillness. Others take longer, need more words, more images, more slow movement through the details of a place or an idea before the thinking function begins to release its grip and allow the softer state to arrive. If you're still here, still with the rock, still in the desert night in whatever way imagination allows, then perhaps you're one of the ones who needs more time. That is not a difficulty, it is simply who you are, and it is honored by everything that has been offered here tonight. So here is more time. Here is the desert, still and dark and full of the sounds that the desert makes when no one is listening and also when someone is. The wind is low tonight, the spinifex barely moves. The stars have rotated far enough that the ones you would recognize at sunset are now at angles that make them unfamiliar, the sky rearranged by the passage of the hours into a configuration that belongs to this specific moment and no other. Uluru is the same as it has been all night, as it was before tonight, as it will be after. The thermal contraction has been producing its sounds, the soft clicks and groans that mark the rock's response to the dropping temperature, and those sounds have been carrying through the desert air to wherever you are, if sound can carry that far, if imagination can bring it that distance. The water holes are still. The water that has been there for weeks or months or years, the water that the rock gathered from a rainfall you were not there to see, reflects the stars with a clarity that water in a desert has earned. It is precious water. It is held carefully by the stone that gathered it, and it holds the sky carefully in return, the stars appearing in it as though they have found a second home in the desert floor, and the rock above all of this is simply there, warm, red, ancient, patient beyond anything that patience usually means, present in the way that only something this real can be present, asking nothing, offering everything, being completely and without performance or effort or awareness of being watched, exactly what it is. You can rest now. Everything's in its place. The desert is where it has always been. The rock is where it has always been. The knowledge that holds this place in meaning is being held by the people who have always held it. Nothing requires your attention. Nothing requires your effort. The world continues without your participation, as it always has and always will. And this is not a diminishment. It is a relief. Sleep. The desert has a particular relationship with time that is worth sitting with in these final moments before sleep arrives. Most environments that human beings inhabit are busy environments. Cities are busy, suburbs are busy, even rural landscapes that seem quiet by comparison with urban ones are busy in their own ways, full of the sounds of machinery and animals and weather and human activity that fills the hours continuously. The desert around Uluru is not busy. It is not the absence of activity, because the desert is full of life, and that life is continuously doing what life does, eating and moving and reproducing and dying in the endless cycling that biology requires. But the pace is different. The scale of space relative to the activity within it is different. There is room for the activity to happen without crowding, without pressure, without the sense that everything's happening at once, and all of it requires your attention. The rock contributes to this quality. Its size and its stillness and its permanence create a kind of anchor for the surrounding space, a fixed point around which the desert organizes itself. Not in any mystical sense, simply in the perceptual sense. When there is something this large and this permanent in the landscape, the mind can orient to it, can use it as a reference point, can allow the rest of the landscape to arrange itself around that reference in a way that feels ordered and comprehensible. This is what sacred sites often do. They provide an orientation point for the human minds that have learned to navigate by them. Uluru tells you where you are, not only in the geographical sense, but in the deeper sense of situating you within a landscape that has meaning and history and ongoing relationship with the people who know it. You are at the center. You are at the place where the songlines meet, where the ancestral beings converge during the creation period, where the knowledge of the continent concentrates in a single formation of red stone that extends further underground than it rises above. This is a useful thing to know before sleep, where you are, not in the abstract, not in terms of coordinates or postal codes or the name of the city or suburb that your body actually occupies tonight, but in the larger sense. You are on an ancient planet, in an ancient landscape, in a species that has been finding meaning in specific places for as long as there have been human minds to find meaning in anything. You belong to a lineage of attention, even if your specific cultural tradition is different from the Anangu tradition, even if the specific places you have known and loved are nothing like the Central Australian desert. The impulse to sit with a place and give it careful attention, to learn what it offers to those who pay it that attention, to understand that the land carries knowledge, and that the knowledge is real and worth having, this is not specific to the Anangu. It is human. It is one of the oldest human impulses there is. The Anangu have developed it to its furthest extent, over the longest period, in one of the most demanding and rewarding environments on Earth. But the impulse is yours too, wherever you are, whatever landscape surrounds your sleeping body tonight. So, let the rock be a reminder. Let Uluru, in the imagination that carries it tonight, remind you that the places you know can be known more deeply, that the attention you give to the ground beneath your feet and the sky above your head and the specific quality of light in your specific place at this specific time of year is never wasted, is always repaid with something that could not be obtained any other way. The desert is still. The rock is warm. The night is long. The stars continue their slow rotation above a place that has been watching them turn for longer than almost anything else on Earth that is still here, and still known and still maintained in relationship by the people who understand it best. You are part of this now, in the small way that a single night of attention can make you part of something ancient. You have sat with Uluru, you have given it some portion of your thought and your imagination and your time. It does not require this of you. It does not need it. But the giving is not wasted. Attention given to something real and ancient and beautiful always returns as something, even when the something is difficult to name. Let that something settle now. Let it find its place in the quiet that is gathering. The rock knows how to wait, the desert knows how to be still. And you, wherever you are, whatever this night is, you can borrow some of that stillness now and let it carry you the rest of the way. Sleep, the rock remains. Good night. The desert holds everything tonight. The ancient rock, the cold clear air, the turning stars, the waiting frogs beneath the red earth, the roots reaching down through the dark toward what they need. All of it held by a landscape that has been holding things longer than anything else we know. Let it hold you now too, just for the length of a breath, and then another. And then whatever comes after that, which is sleep or something close enough to sleep that the difference does not matter. The rock is warm. The desert is still. You are held. There is a quality that very old places share, a quality that is difficult to name precisely, but that most people recognize when they encounter it. It is not age itself, because age alone does not produce the quality. There are old places that feel dead, that feel like they have used up whatever they once had, and are now simply persisting out of geological inertia. Uluru does not feel like that. It feels charged, present, as though the 60,000 years of human relationship with it, the 60,000 years of ceremony and song and story and attention, have left something in the stone that is not physical, but is nonetheless real. Scientists would resist this description, and rightly so within the terms of their methodology. There is no instrument that measures what a place has received from the attention of those who have known it. There is no unit of measurement for accumulated ceremony. The physics of stone does not include a variable for 60,000 years of human love directed at a specific formation of Arco sandstone in the Central Australian desert. But the experience of visitors at Uluru is consistent enough, and reported across enough different cultural backgrounds and personal frameworks, that it seems worth taking seriously as data of a different kind. People arrive at Uluru prepared to be impressed by the scenery. They leave having had an experience that they consistently describe as exceeding what scenery can account for. Something else happens at Uluru, something that the geological and ecological and cultural explanations all gesture toward without fully capturing. The Anangu have a word for what a place can hold and express. The Chukurpa is not only a set of stories, it is a living presence in the landscape, a dimension of reality that is continuously active in the places where the ancestral beings acted during the creation period. When an Anangu elder says that Uluru is alive, this is not a metaphor, and it is not animism in the dismissive sense that word is sometimes used. It is a statement about the nature of the Chukurpa, which is that it is ongoing, that the creation is not finished, that the ancestral beings are not gone but present in the landscape in the specific forms that their actions took. Uluru is one of those forms. The rock is the Chukurpa made visible and tangible and durable. To be at Uluru is to be in the presence of the ongoing creation, in a place where the fabric between the ordinary world and the Chukurpa dimension is thin, where what is usually invisible is closer to the surface. Whether you hold this understanding as literally true, as metaphorically true, or as a beautiful and complex cultural framework that deserves respect even if you cannot fully enter it, the effect of sitting with it is similar. It makes the rock more. It makes the desert night more. It makes the stars above more and the ground below more and the quality of the air more. The attention that knowledge and story direct at a place accumulates there, and the accumulation changes what the place is. This is what 60,000 years of human relationship with Uluru has produced, a place that is more than its geology, more than its ecology, more than its cultural significance in the narrow institutional sense, a place that is alive in whatever way places can be alive, that receives and holds and expresses what has been given to it, that offers back to those who come to it in the right spirit something that cannot be found anywhere else on earth. You have been in the presence of that tonight, in whatever way this kind of presence is accessible through the mediation of words and imagination. You have given your attention, for however long this night has lasted, to one of the most attention-worthy places in the world. That is not nothing. That is not a small thing. The desert does not ask for acknowledgement. The rock does not need your recognition. But something in you may need the acknowledgement of what you have been sitting with tonight. The acknowledgement that the world is ancient and layered and full of knowledge that is deeper than any single person or generation or culture can hold, and that this is not a frightening thing, but a reassuring one. The world is not exhausted. There is more in it than we have found. The night has given everything it has to give. The night has given everything it has to give. The words have done what words can do, which is never the whole thing, but is always something real, always a bridge between where you started and where you are now. Where you are now is closer to sleep. The desert has been patient with you tonight. The rock has been present. The knowledge shared here was offered in good faith, as a gift from a place and a people who have been giving this particular gift for 60,000 years. The Anangu say that country takes care of those who take care of it. You have taken care of this country tonight in the small but real way of giving it your attention. Let it take care of you now. Let the image of the red rock in the desert dark be the last thing the mind rests on before it finally releases into the quiet the body has been waiting for. There is nothing left to figure out, nothing left to carry forward into tomorrow. The desert floor is cool. The rock has been releasing the day's warmth slowly into the night air. The Milky Way arches above Uluru in its full density, the dark MU completing its circuit, the galactic center rising in the southeast, the stars doing what they have done above this place for longer than the rock itself has stood here. Every people has their center. For the Anangu, that center is Uluru. It has been Uluru for 60,000 years, and it will remain Uluru for as long as the people and the rock endure together, which is to say for a very long time. Let the waiting be easy tonight. Let the dark be soft. Let the knowledge that Uluru is there, warm and red and patient and present, be the last thing the thinking mind touches before it releases. The rock is warm. The night is long. You are held by something older than anything you know. And Uluru remains, as it has always remained. Good night.